Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 51. Shen Li shook her head. If I can't see the body, I won't believe it. The surrounding generals all bowed their heads and remained silent. The hall was silent for a long time and a voice muttered. This general saw with his own eyes. The bearded general looked slumped. This general saw the Mo Fong general being eaten by them. Shen Li held the coffin and looked at the broken sword and broken clothes inside. A sense of powerlessness entangled her footsteps. She couldn't walk, her legs turned soft. This general also saw it with his own eyes. Someone else whispered, and more people confirmed. Shen Li had to believe the fact that Mo Fong died tragically. Her 5 fingers were clasped on the thick coffin, and her fingertips turned white for applying too much force. With a kala sound of breaking, she left a fingerprint on the thick, solid wood coffin. I understand. She nodded, her voice was extremely low, but it looked like a broken string, and everyone's heart hung up after hearing it. This king knows now. She lowered her head, as if in silence. She didn't show her emotions, but this bow made people feel that this woman who had always straightened her back was like a hedgehog whose thorns had been pulled out. At this moment, there was no aggressiveness. The demons were defeated and Mo Fong and other generals died tragically. If she was there. If she were there, would things not be so bad? Shen Li clenched her teeth, but after a while, she raised her head again and turned to leave the side of Mo Fong's coffin. She continued to read the remaining tags on the corpses of the generals, and then slowly walked outside the mourning hall. Shen Li kept walking, step by step, each step firmer, each step calmer. Shen Li knew better than anyone that people cannot come back from death. Regret is useless. What she can do is let the living continue to live. She will protect them. Stepping out of the mourning hall, the decayed smell in the air was still pungent. Shen Li stepped onto the training platform, put one hand on her chest, and the other pointed directly at the sky. She whispered a spell, and a white brilliance slowly came from her body. Ascending, a beam of bright light centered on her, spreading around. I use my name to draw the forgotten river. The 7-character inspires soul, the words are sonorous, and with this voice, wherever the light touches, it is like a firefly dance, rising to the sky overwhelmingly in this desolate evening. The scene was very beautiful, but also extremely sad. The sorrowful cry seemed to break people's hearts. Shen Li saw from a distance that many people were crying and chasing after the bleak light in the place where soldiers were buried as if wishing to go with them. Shen Li dropped her hands and clenched her fists. I, Azure King, Shen Li, swear by my life. Her voice was not loud, but the generals under the training platform could hear clearly. This hatred will be reported. The wind passed, shaking Shen Li's hair. Countless shining lights floated in front of her as if her soldiers used the last strength to go along with her vows. The sky was getting darker, and the same moon was shining in different places. A young man in a purple cloak stood quietly by the grass and trees by the river. Oh? Has Azure King returned to the demon realm? Yes, this subordinate also received this news. Shen Li came back to the demon realm this afternoon. The black-clothed masked man bowed his head to the ground and replied respectfully. She brought back the pill from the heavens to relieve the demon lord poison, and then used the spirit technique to extradite tens of thousands of resentful spirits in the capital. Oh, just like a savior. No wonder the demon lord and all those mediocre people tried to protect her. The young man's fingertips lightly touched the rough bark. I searched the entire demon palace without finding even a breath of phoenix fire pearl. It seems that the demon lord has given the bead to Shen Li. It seems that now I have to deal with her. General Fu Xing, we have lost 58 demons and some bodies in the last battle. It hasn't been spliced yet, and I'm afraid it won't be easy to fight again in such a short time. No matter how powerful Shen Li is, she is only one person. Fu Xing groaned for a while. Bring Shen Li out, then I will kill her and retrieve the Phoenix Fire Pearl. Yes. The man in black agreed with his fists, and then hesitated again. General, but young master. Fu Xing's eyes were cold. You must not let the young master know, before this matter is done. In the face of Shen Li, the young master was too soft too many times. I have to kill Shen Li to get the Phoenix Fire Orb and to eliminate it. After Shen Li dies, the young master will not have any objections. Even if he gets mad, he won't be able to do anything. Fu Xing's eyes were cold. You must not let the young master know, before this matter is done. In the face of Shen Li, the young master was too soft too many times. I have to kill Shen Li to get the Phoenix Fire Orb and to eliminate it. After Shen Li dies, the young master will not have any objections. Even if he gets mad, he won't be able to do anything. A black air rose from his fingertips, but within a short time he enveloped the tree, and after a while, all the leaves were withered and black. Qi grew stronger, and finally condensed into a small black bead and fell on Fu Xing's palm. He swallowed the beads in one mouth. But before these things, find me a few strong living people to help me regulate my internal breath. Subordinates will obey. The wind blew and the withered leaves fell and scattered. It was already the second day when Shen Li arranged the affairs of the barracks. She took time to return to her palace, but she saw that although Ruya was frightened, she was still in good spirits. She was there with her hair on her body intact. One person and one bird, from the moment Shen Li stepped into the door, started talking loudly, telling her the panic of that day. Shen Li listened quietly, and only touched Ruya's head to comfort her. I'm here now, so I won't let anyone insult you again. Ruya was startled and made a noise with her mouth suddenly closed. She looked at Shen Li with red eyes, and then cried out with an sound. She was really frightened. After resting for a while in the palace, Shen Li changed her clothes, put on light armor, and was about to enter the palace again, but before she could go out, Ruya called her, and wailed for a long time and finally said, "The Lord must take care. Ruya and Shirshir are waiting for you to come back." Shen Li smiled. It's okay, I'll just go to the palace, and I'll come back in the evening. Ruya nodded, but watching Shen Li walk out of the mansion door without looking back, she felt an inexplicable panic in her heart, like she would never come back again. "Lord, take care!" Ruya shouted out again. Shen Li waved her hand and didn't look back. "I will." Although the demon lord's poison has faded, he has lost too much blood before and is still unconscious. The civil servants were anxious, but they had no choice, so the three elders sat in the meeting hall to replace the devil with temporary powers. Shen Li sat on the left side of the chamber, quietly listening to the officials below reporting the follow-up situation of the riots in various places. It was almost as if it was to contain the local army. When the enemy attacked the capital, riots occurred. However, after a few days, they gradually subsided. Shen Li frowned when she heard that something like that happened. The only explanation for this is, there is an inner spy, a traitor. One of the elders said this quietly, not only planning the riots. This old man has been studying the route of the other party's retreat. The person must be familiar with the structure of the demon kingdom, otherwise it would be impossible to withdraw so soon. And what's worse is that chaos occurred in various places at the same time, which means that there are spies everywhere. I agree. Shen Li said coldly, these spies are not only familiar with the local area, but also familiar with the army structure of the demon realm. They must be people in the army. In this war, the missing people, the people who are walking secretly, capture the three clans, and judge them one by one. Shen Li has never been a soft-hearted person. This order was issued without hesitation. Report. A hurried voice came from outside the hall, and the messenger broke into the door, kneeling and clasping his fists. My lord. Those invulnerable monsters have appeared again. Everyone was shocked, and Shen Li stood up immediately. Her gaze was cold. Where? How many? There are only 4 or 5, and the direction they are going is Su Tianyuan. The meeting hall became noisy. Everyone knew that there were thousands of monsters in Su Tianyuan. If the enemies break through the barrier and let those monsters out, that would be a catastrophe. Su Tianyuan's barrier will not be broken. Shen Li said, "Don't worry, everyone." She asked the messenger calmly, "Apart from the movement, do they have other actions?" Yes, they burned and killed along the way. Wherever they passed, they left no one alive. Bastards. The general listening couldn't take any more. They think that there's no one in the demon realm anymore, clasped his fists, and knelt down. Please let this general fight. The meeting hall was noisy for a while, and some civil servants persuaded, before in the capital, you had no chance, but now you think you can win the battle? It's better for us to solve the mystery of their bodies first, and then there can be a way to overcome it. How can we let them be arrogant now? We are fighting for our lives, and... Shut up. Shen Li scolded coldly. How can a general of the demon race be so desperate? It really makes people laugh. There was silence in the conference hall. The discussion hall fell silent. Shen Li stood up, wearing light armor, and murmured slightly, "This time, this king will meet those monsters." Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 52. Shen Li had previous experience of fighting against such weird people, but according to what the soldiers and generals said, those weird people seemed to be even more powerful now. Just in case, Shen Li deliberately asked 3 generals of the army to go with her. They all fought against those weird people a few days ago, and were more experienced and capable than others. The point of this trip is not to kill the enemy, but to catch them alive. Even if only one person is captured back, it's good enough. Bring back the creature to study so we can find out their fatal points in case they attack us later. Shen Li urged before departure. Then said, "But don't try too hard." General Daomu smiled. "Is the king treating us as new soldiers? The most unpleasant things on the battlefield, we know. We've seen it all." Shen Li nodded. "Several generals are all elites in the army. Your clan doesn't lose to anybody." She sighed and set off. Shen Li didn't need to return to the palace to change. She has always been in light armor, ready to go on expeditions. Riding on the clouds, they traveled extremely fast. From time to time, they could see down the red field of the land where the demons had fought. They hurried away, trying to get there as fast as possible. Not far to the north was Tianyuan-su. With sharp eyes, Shen Li glanced down on the cloud and saw that a creature was grabbing a child, holding the child's arms with both hands and opening his mouth, as if he was about to tear the child to eat. The child was so scared he forgot to cry, only staring at the creature in a daze. Suddenly, a silver light slashed from the right side, and the spear blade was like a knife, slashing down, cutting off the demon's hand. Shen Li knew how strong their bodies were, so this shot did not spare any effort and cut off the hand of the demon. The blade of the weapon hit the ground fiercely, and its strength poured into the earth vigorously. The surrounding vegetation trembled. The creature raised his head and hissed. The blood from his 2 broken arms splashed on the child's face. However, the child just looked at Shen Li's back, as if he had not realized that he had been rescued. Shen Li didn't have time to take care of the child and only threw him behind her into the grass. She raised her spear and stepped forward without giving the demon a chance to react. The tip of the weapon was covered with fierce mana and went straight through his heart. Such an attack could not kill the demon, but Shen Li didn't want to kill him. As long as he couldn't move, it would be enough. However, she hadn't even pulled out the tip of the gun when suddenly she heard someone shouting in the air, "Lord, be careful." A fierce palm made of wind roared behind her. Shen Li managed to dodge it, avoiding the blow. Pulling out her spear and grabbing it horizontally, she swept and cut straight through the neck of the man behind her. Blood spurted out, and in just a moment, Shen Li was already covered in blood. Suddenly, there was a sound of fighting in the air. Shen Li raised her head and saw that 3 creatures were fighting the 3 generals in the air. When did these creatures learn the technique of flying clouds? They are constantly getting stronger. Shen Li was surprised at first, but regained her concentration when suddenly felt a strange movement behind her back. I see that Azure King has been living well. Shen Li's palm tightened in her silver spear. Her head had not even turned back to look at the person speaking when something hit her spear. The tip of the spear bent like cotton, all her strength was taken off. She quickly pulled away and retreated. 10 meters away, she turned her head to look at the person again. He wore a green uniform, his face unchanged. "Fuxing?" Shen Li said coldly. "Oh, it's my blessing that Azure King can remember me." In spite of his polite words, Shen Li knew that this person had evil intentions, and knew that there must have been some kind of conspiracy that brought her here today. Her brow sank, her ears heard the 3 people and 3 creatures still fighting in the air. Under the circumstances, it was really unnecessary for Shen Li to confront him now and add casualties. However, she didn't have the heart to retreat and listen to what Fuxing said. "I'll not lie to you, the truth is, I came to see Azure King this time, because I need something you possess." Shen Li sneered, but before she could speak, he smiled again and said, "Naturally, I know that Azure King would not be willing to give this to me freely." So. The air surrounding them suddenly became murderous, and his eyes were cold. "I'll trouble the king to die today." "Fuxing, you're daydreaming." Such provocation made Shen Li's eyes even more chilly, and neither of the 2 acted first. The surrounding airflow gradually became bitter, and the vegetation between the 2 had been torn apart silently and turned to ashes. The airflow expanded and spread to the side. The bushes shook, the leaves trembled in the wind, sometimes to the left, sometimes to the right, until they couldn't hold on anymore and flew away. The tree trunk cracked with a sound and burst fiercely. "Ah!" The child who was hiding behind the tree cried out. The force when the tree was exploded pushed him 2 feet away. "I can't go on like this." The child's cry was like a signal, touching Shen Li's nerves. She stomped forward with her toes, using her whole body, and the whole person flew out like an arrow. Fuxing couldn't avoid or hide. When Shen Li attacked him, he suddenly noticed a powerful aura pressing him down on the ground. Shen Li's spear tip was slightly tilted but coming directly at Fuxing. Fuxing suddenly turned to his side and turned his hand into a claw aiming at Shen Li's heart. But Shen Li had already predicted his moves. The silver spear was retracted, and its tail hit Fuxing's hand. At first, it didn't look like a strong attack, but it touched Fuxing's palm, so his skin was directly burned, leaving a scorched palm. Unexpectedly, at some point, Shen Li had cast a fire spell on the red spear, making the entire silver spear extremely hot. The child who was rescued by Shen Li looked at Shen Li with bright eyes, full of admiration and worship. Shen Li waved her hand. The child cleverly knew what she meant, and immediately ran away. She turned over and leaped, holding her spear body and falling 10 steps away from Fuxing, her movements were like a dance. She said, "This is a gift to you." She was burned by fire in the heavens. She still remembers clearly. This is retribution. Fu Xing looked at his scorched hands, raised his head, and laughed sharply. "Interesting, you are worthy of being my opponent." As soon as the voice fell, he didn't stop at all, his figure moved, and his movements were 10 times faster than before. He rushed forward, no swords or weapons, only turning his fingers into claws, and fought with Shen Li empty-handed. The two of them staggered, sometimes turning into the wind and fighting into the sky, sometimes turning into light and disappearing in a flash. In an instant, Shen Li had exchanged no less than 100 moves with him. The more she fought with him, the stranger she felt. This person's moves were somewhat similar to her own, but when you pay more attention, the subtleties were somewhat different. The same tactics of open and close hand were supposed to be extremely tough, but he used them to be a bit insidious and unpredictable. Azure King isn't joking. After one move, the two stood on both sides in the air, and he smiled strangely, "But I think your subordinates don't have the same ability." As soon as Shen Li heard these words, she looked down and suddenly found that, not far below, the 3 generals were fighting with the 3 creatures. At this time, the creature whose neck was cut by Shen Li also joined in. 4-3 made the already struggling generals even more powerless to fight. At this time, 2 of them were obviously injured, their attacks were weak, and the situation was critical. Shen Li was anxious. She leaned down and rushed towards that side, but how could Fu Xing let her go? He followed behind. Shen Li was furious. "Go away." "Forgive me, I can't." Fu Xing stretched his hand forward, his nails soaring, his 5 fingers gathered together, and his nails stood in front of Shen Li like a knife. "I'm your opponent." As he spoke, one of the creatures hit General Daomu's abdomen with a punch. Shen Li saw the general spit out a mouthful of blood. The red light in the depths of her eyes surged, and her whole body was trembling. "I said, get out," Shen Li said while waving her silver spear, but Fu Xing raised his hand to block it. His nails were harder than Shen Li had imagined, and Shen Li's spear was even stronger than Fu Xing expected. Everyone was shaken a few meters away by their strength, but Shen Li did not hesitate. She continued rushing away to the generals. Fu Xing looked at his nails, the light in his eyes moved, and he caught up again. With a low shout, Shen Li cut off one of the creature's head with the spear, broke a gap between the other creatures and the generals, and protected the 3 from falling to the ground. The red tasseled spear plunged into the ground, and the red flames formed a barrier to separate herself from the 3. The Azure King ordered, "You 3 withdraw. I'll fight with them." The Azure King general ordered, "You 3 withdraw. I'll fight with them." Before the 3 generals could speak, suddenly a gap was torn out of the flame barrier, and 5 sharp nails penetrated the barrier. The flame barrier broke. Shen Li gritted her teeth, and the red light in her eyes was even worse. The heat wave rolled everywhere. She forced the chasing Fu Xing back a few steps, and shouted, "Retreat." Without worrying about the generals, she could find a way to escape. The 3 generals also understood the situation at this time, that the most difficult thing to deal with was not the creatures, but the youth in the green robe. They were already injured, and if they drag on now, they would only hurt Shen Li. The 3 of them glanced at each other, and as soon as they thought about running, they were interrupted by a creature's roar, and 2 other creatures ran out of the bushes and ran into the 3 generals. Daomu was already injured, and the other 2 generals stepped in front of him to protect him, blocking the attack in front. But no one noticed that the creature whose hands were pierced by Shen Li's was actually alive. At this time, the creature climbed to Daomu's footsteps and bit his calf off in one bit. Dao Mu gritted his teeth to resist the severe pain, raised the big knife in his hand, and slashed down, cutting the creature's head straight, thinking that he could die today, but he wouldn't die alone. The creatures who had fought in the air before fell again and surrounded the generals. The two generals in front couldn't protect themselves, much less help Dao Mu. They only heard Dao Mu's unbearable scream as he was dragged by those creatures. The creatures tore his limbs, with blood spattering, they ate and swallowed his flesh. Shen Li was trying to draw Fuxing away, and suddenly heard the screams behind her. She caught a glimpse of such a scene in the surrounding light. Her head went blank, and she didn't even feel it when Fuxing's 5 fingers swiped on her back. It turns out, they really eat people. It turned out that the general of her demon realm was killed in such a way. Fuxing smiled crazily. Isn't this scene beautiful? Thanks to this battle, my pets were able to have a good meal. The general that valued her so much, living beings who guarded this land with her. Bastard, Shen Li's fingertips were white while holding the silver spear. Bastard. She lowered her head, gritted her teeth, and was about to take a step towards the generals, when Fuxing stretched out his hand to stop her again. You are not allowed to save people until the battle is over. He didn't have the time to finish when Shen Li raised her head suddenly. Fuxing was slightly startled. He saw a trace of scarlet coming out of Shen Li's eyes, her black and white eyes, accumulating bright red liquid that looked like blood, sticking from the corners of her eyes, falling down across her cheeks. A drop finally fell and sank into the ground. In an instant, Shen Li's airflow rioted around him, like a hurricane swirling across the world. The golden hairband on Shen Li's head broke and her black hair was scattered, violently whipping the air surrounding her, and its roots slowly turned red, like magma. Shen Li only felt an extremely hot breath surging in her gut, slowly burning her blood and the reason in her mind. The red-silver spear rose out of the white mist, and as the airflow stirred around Shen Li, the hot breath stopped abruptly. In the blink of an eye, Shen Li disappeared and went straight to the place where the creatures gathered. She did not bother using a weapon. She slapped one of the creature's heads with her bare palm. The head of the creature instantly ignited in flames. The creatures let out screams that could pierce eardrums, but Shen Li seemed to hear nothing. Turning around, she hit her palm above the chest of another creature. Flames burned in his chest. However, she didn't stop there. She slapped all the creatures in the scene, and they all burned up, without exception. Finally, after all the demons were burned to ashes, Shen Li waved her palm and shot at one of the generals, but the palm with the scorching temperature stopped 3 inches from the general's heart, without touching it. Shen Li bowed slightly and shook her head in confusion as if trying to get her sanity back. Finally, she turned her head and her scarlet eyes glared at Fuxing. In an instant, her figure fell in front of Fuxing. You damn thing. She spoke every word with difficulty, and as soon as her voice fell, she waved her claws at Fuxing. Fuxing stretched out his hand to block, only to feel that his nails, that were as hard as iron, instantly softened. Shen Li's hand slapped his cheek unimpeded. This slap was extremely loud, and Fuxing retreated several feet away and immediately murmured an ice spell. Condensing ice, clutching his cheek that was hit by Shen Li, ice and fire collided with each other on his cheek. The pain did not make him lose his mind, but it made Fuxing's eyes even colder. As expected of the Phoenix. His tone was indistinct, and before he could adjust to the injury on his face, Shen Li attacked again. The silver spear radiating dazzling light struck with the momentum of the thunderbolt, unstoppable. Fuxing was stunned. He was being suppressed and forced to retreat all the way. Finally, he found a gap, so he set up the cloud, turned, and fled. Shen Li chased him away. A general yelled on the ground, "King! Don't chase him. He is full of tricks. Shen Li couldn't even hear him, chasing Fu Xing's figure. She disappeared into the air after him. As she ran all the way to the human world, Shen Li suddenly felt that the surrounding water vapor was heavier. She was distracted, and Fu Xing escaped to the sea. Taking advantage of Shen Li's distraction, Fu Xing sent a signal to the sky. In no time, several people in black suddenly appeared beside him. When Shen Li turned her head and saw them, the red spear swept out the air, and the flames rushed towards the black-clothed men. Two people who didn't have time to react were burned to ashes on the spot. The other ones quickly avoided and separated. They chanted a spell very cooperatively. The moisture in the air instantly became icy, turning into very small ice scum, and pressed against Shen Li's body, as if to surround her. An inexplicable arc suddenly cracked at the corner of Shen Li's mouth. The heat in her abdomen became even more intense. The heat circulated in her body, causing clusters of flames to appear on her skin. The heat wave burned away all the water vapor. The people in black were shocked, and looked at Fu Xing with a slight fluster. "My lord, the water technique has no effect on her." The water technique. These three slightly familiar words sting Shen Li's eardrums, and a white figure slowly emerged in her increasingly chaotic mind, and she seemed to hear him sigh, "You made yourself so embarrassed again. How can these people know the water stop technique? That is obviously a god spell." Shen Li was slightly stunned. Fu Xing saw her distraction and suddenly shouted, "Summon all the creatures." Receiving the order, the man in black took out a strange musical instrument in his hand. He blew it 2 or 3 times, and there was a roar in the distance in harmony with him. With a wave of his hand, Fu Xing turned all the waves into ice arrows, piercing sharply towards Shen Li. The murderous intent was approaching, and Shen Li suddenly came back to her senses. She did not dodge, and the flames all over her swelled up, burning out all the ice in an instant. Before Fu Xing had time to see her movements, he felt his jaw warm. Shen Li had already grabbed his lapels. "Say, how did you learn the stop water technique?" Fu Xing smiled. "The king seems to be extremely concerned about that god's affairs." Shen Li stared at him coldly as she put her hands in his heart. With one thought she could burn him to ashes. A thunderbolt fell from the sky between the sparks and flints, forcing Shen Li to throw Fu Xing away. She retreated a few feet away and then turning her head to face the new opponent. There stood a young man with black clothes and black hair. His face couldn't be more familiar to Shen Li. "Mo. Fong. Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 53. Mo Fong looked at Shen Li for a long time. Finally his eyelids drooped slightly, and he looked sideways at Fu Xing behind him, with a cold expression. "Who allowed you to do this?" "The subordinate is guilty." Fu Xing had no intention of denying what he did. "It's just that the thing that Azure King holds is something we can't give up. The subordinate has to take it. I concealed from the young master because I feared that the young master would indulge in the past and harbor unnecessary kindness. I thought it would be better to let the subordinates get rid of it first so the young master wouldn't have to worry. I'll ask again, who allowed you to do this?" Mo Fong's expression was stern. There was a majesty between his brows Shen Li saw before. Fu Xing's jaw was clenched and he said silently, "It's this subordinate's own opinions." He seemed to be subdued, but deep in his eyes there was a bit of disapproval. "But today, Azure King must die. Go." Mo Fong only said a word indifferently. Fu Xing raised his head and looked at Mo Fong in dissatisfaction, and repeated, "Azure King must die today." Mo Fong closed his eyes lightly, seeming to endure with all his strength. "I said, go. This is an order." So, Fu Xing stepped back a little distance. Please forgive the young master for his subordinate's crimes of disobedience. Mo Fong was angry, his breath was heavy, and he heard Shen Li's startled voice. Young master? Mo Fong clenched his fists and turned his head to look at Shen Li. Her eyes were red, and her normally bundled hair was now out of shape, adding a bit of embarrassment to her. The roots of her hair were red, and the red was still slowly spreading to the rest of her hair. The corners of Mo's lips moved. The king, he involuntarily called out. Young master, Shen Li only stared at him blankly, as if she couldn't understand such a name for a while. Her scarlet eyes looked up between the two of them, and then glanced at a circle of creatures surrounding them from all sides. There were many fragments of thought scattered in her mind, her people dying, broken clothes and swords, no corpses, and military spies who were familiar with the demon world. So, it's you. She suddenly realized. Mo's eyebrows drooped slightly and did not answer. Shen Li stood quietly in the air, her voice seemed to be extremely weak. Thinking about the past, I still remember that was I who promoted you to a general in the king's capital. I have known you for 300 years. I went to the battlefield with you no less than 10 times. Our friendship lasted between life and death. I entrust you my people and regarded you as a brother. Shen Li's voice paused, her breath moved a little, and her tone gradually rose. I have to ask. Did I treat you badly? Did the demon lord treat you poorly? The demon realm has never harmed you. Now you are killing my people, killing my generals, and killing my lord. You have become the traitorous general of the rebel army. She raised her spear and pointed at Mo Fong. Who are to take the lives of my people? Mo Fong remained silent. Instead, the Fu Xing behind him laughed loudly. If you have never truly joined the army, how can you become a rebel? If you have never belonged there, how can you talk about treason? Fu Xing said loudly, how precious is my young master. Forced by the situation, he had to condescend and be humiliated in the current demon world. If you want to talk about treason, the demon you are now loyal to is the real traitor. The thief who stole our world. Shut up. Mo Fong said in a low voice and looked at Shen Li. My king, it is my fault to lie to you. I know that my sins are serious and there is no forgiveness. Since you have confessed your sins, what qualifications do you have to call me your king? Shen Li's voice was extremely low, and the red tasseled spear in her hand was tightly held. Fu Xing sneered, young master, don't slander yourself. You did nothing wrong, it's these foolish and loyal people who don't have eyes. Fu Xing paused, clasped his fists, and begged Mo Fong. Young master, we spent all our efforts to attack the demon's realm for the Phoenix Fire Orb, and now this subordinate has determined that the Phoenix Fire Orb is on Shen Li. There is only this pearl in the world. If this pearl is not seized, our 100 years of planning will go to waste. I hope the young master will not be emotional, please consider the overall situation. Mo Fong clenched his fists tightly, and once again spit out the word, go, with great difficulty. Fu Xing's expression was cold, as if he had made some determination, and stopped talking to persuade him. Only quietly winking aside, a man in black saw it, nodded, and was just about to leave, but suddenly felt his chest hot. He didn't know when Shen Li's hot silver spear had passed through his chest. With a wave of Shen Li's hand, the red tassel spear flew back to her with the corpse of the man in black hanging on it. Between her fingers, the man in black wearing the silver spear was burned by the flames and instantly turned to ashes. The bright red in Shen Li's eyes was even worse, almost swallowing her still clear black pupils. If you want to grab something from this king, first put your life down. Fu Xing frowned, waved his hand, and ordered loudly, go. Mo Fong was still waiting to speak, but Fu Xing squeezed his wrist fiercely. With a sly and gloomy tone he said, "Young master, please, keep the big picture in your heart." Mo Fong was startled. With this delay, all the creatures received the order and rushed forward. Although Shen Li was 10 times more brave than usual at this time, she still couldn't help but be wary of so many creatures. These creatures were truly furious. As long as the master gave an order, even if they were crushed, they would not hesitate to complete his instructions. Although there was a fierce flame burning around Shen Li, the creatures ignored the pain of being burned. Using their bodies as shields, 4 of them hugged Shen Li's limbs separately, making her unable to move. Shen Li burned 4 of them, but 4 more came. With this repeating for a long time, the battle gradually consumed her mana. She was slightly weakened and was inadvertently dragged into the sea by the creatures. Seeing this, Fu Xing made a seal in his hand, the curse was whispered, and his hand pointed downward. The white mist plummeted and covered the water. After Shen Li sank, the sea immediately condensed into ice, and he didn't care about the life and death of those creatures who sank with Shen Li. Looking at the seawater that was gradually freezing, Mo Fong clenched his fists tightly. Fu Xing glanced at Mo Fong. "When the breath of Shen Li disappears from the ice after I take out the phoenix fireball from her body, I will leave her corpse for the young master as a memorial." Mo Fong was silent for a long time as if he had made a great determination, his voice solemn. "Let her go. Forgive me, master. Only a little bit more and we can succeed. How can I give up at this time? If I say to you, to let her go, you obey, or I'm letting you go." He was not asking, but threatening. Fu Xing quietly looked at Mo Fong for a long time. "Then you'll have to step on this subordinate's corpse." Before Mo Fong could speak, he suddenly heard the cracking sound of kala on the ice surface. Fu Xing was startled and turned his head to look. Impossible. Before he could react, a heat wave broke out of the ice, and the red tassel silver spear pierced Fu Xing's chest with the momentum of breaking a bamboo. The tip of the spear pierced his chest without hesitation. Shen Li's eyes were redder than blood, and her black hair had all turned crimson. She was like the evil spirit Shura in the murals of the demon world, just coming for his life. Shen Li's eyes were redder than blood, and her black hair had all turned crimson. She was like the evil spirit Shura in the murals of the demon world, coming for his life. "This king is going to step on your corpse today." After saying that, she pulled out the spear. The blood-stained silver spear was like evil itself. The extremely hot temperature made Mo Fong feel uncomfortable. Shen Li didn't give Fu Xing a chance to breathe, and the spearhead swept across, aiming straight to his head. When Mo Fong saw this, he tried to stop Shen Li from the side. It was that moment that gave Fu Xing time to stagger to the side. The people in black hugged him and hurriedly supported him. After letting Fu Xing run away, Shen Li turned to look at Mo Fong. Before he could speak, she slammed his chest with a palm. The fire ignited from her heart and burned his heart and lungs. Mo Fong tried to concentrate and calm down. He roughly suppressed the rising flames. When he finally succeeded and took a sigh of relief, he saw that Shen Li started attacking him again. "You should also pay for the generals of the demon realm." Mo Fong drew back, and the corners of his lips moved bitterly. "If I could die, I'd be dead." Shen Li couldn't listen to his words at this time, she was busy attacking him with her spear. Mo Fong on the other hand, only defended but did not attack, repeatedly evading, and in a blink of an eye, he led Shen Li a long distance. A black aura gushed out of Fu Xing's palm. He pressed his wound and looked at the 2 fighting figures with cold eyes. He said in a gloomy voice, "The young master wants to lead Shen Li away. You must not let Shen Li escape this time. Stop the young master, take the creatures to trap Shen Li. After I take a rest, I will take her life." He finished his command, and the man in black followed his orders. The man in black chose a creature from his side. With one hand on the creature's shoulders, he said, "Good boy, I'm only doing this because it is necessary, so just treat it like your duty to our master. I thank you for your great loyalty to the master." As soon as the voice fell, the creature's eyes burst out, and he turned his head stiffly. He saw Fu Xing's 5 fingers turn into claws, and penetrate his fleshy breastbone. His beating heart suddenly pinched, and the pain was beyond words. Without hesitation, Fu Xing pulled out his heart and pushed his body away. The creature fell into the sea like a discarded toy and disappeared on the waves. Fu Xing bit down the creature's bloody heart and swallowed it into his stomach without even chewing. After a while, he finished eating the heart and wiped off the bloodstains on the corners of his lips. He breathed a sigh of relief to the sky as if he was very happy. The wound on his chest that was made by Shen Li was healing at an incredible high speed. Black qi gushed from the wound and finally healed entirely. The black qi went up along his chest, turned on his neck, climbed up his cheeks, and finally got into his eyes that were entirely white. When the black qi reached his white eyes, it tinted them black, making them like the eyes of an animal. He then stared straight at Shen Li with a chilling gaze. At this time, the heat in Shen Li's abdomen almost made her feel pain. However, it was this pain that caused her body to continuously gush out huge power, which seemed to be able to burn mountains and rivers. She did not know why, but while fighting, all reason was gradually eroded by a hot kill word consuming her mind. Someone attacked behind her, but it didn't matter. Shen Li knew that she could continue to fight no matter how badly injured she was. She continued to attack Mo Feng, her moves all fatal. Mo Feng struggled to avoid Shen Li's blows, but when he saw a creature attacking her back, his heart was startled. He also saw that Shen Li had no intention of avoiding it at all. He was anxious and subconsciously wanted to stop Shen Li, but she used his distraction and her red spear went straight to his throat relentlessly. He hurriedly avoided but was still scratched by the spear. Blood gushed out, and Mo Feng stared blankly at Shen Li. She really wanted to kill him, she didn't hesitate even a bit. And he was right. As far as Shen Li was concerned, he made such a hateful thing, how can she not kill him? This time Mo Feng discovered that her blade was too honest, and he couldn't accept it. The creature behind Shen Li attacked again, but Shen Li didn't even turn her head. A heat wave raged out all over, pushing Mo Feng and the creature a few feet away. Shen Li shot to the front as soon as she saw Mo Feng, and continued her attack, this time aiming at his heart. Mo Feng gritted his teeth, a purple light appeared on his hand, he held a sword that seemed to carry the light of thunders in his palm. With a crisp ding sound, he resisted Shen Li's blow. If it had been an ordinary weapon, it would have been damaged a long time ago, but the purple sword was not only intact, even its brilliance increased. At this time, Shen Li didn't care about the amazing weapon and only shot at Mo Feng again with her spear in a vertical position. Mo Feng blocked with his sword horizontally, and the two huge forces collided, discharging a powerful wave of air. She heard a caw sound and saw that her red-tasseled silver spear and the purple sword actually split a big hole on the ground. Shen Li's scarlet eyes moved slightly, she felt that the weight of the silver gun in her hand was greatly reduced, and her anger disappeared. But in the next moment, the weapon that had accompanied her for hundreds of years made a pop sound and broke in 2 pieces. After cutting off the silver spear, the purple sword's momentum remained unabated, and it almost reached Shen Li's neck. Mo Feng didn't have time to apologize, and only said, "My king, there are no guards in the southeast." Shen Li dropped her hands in a daze, and the 2 pieces of the silver spear sank to the bottom of the sea. She raised her head and looked at Mo Feng. Today, After all of this, how do you expect me to believe you? Mo Fong bit his teeth. If you don't believe me, then forgive Mo Fong for his disrespect. Disregarding the flames on Shen Li's skin, he grabbed her wrist, intending to take her away. Shen Li was stunned by him, but at this moment, she suddenly felt a chill in her back. When she looked down, she had 5 fingers through her chest. Mo Fong turned his head in amazement, seeing Fu Xing behind Shen Li. His pupils tightened. There was blood gushing out of Shen Li's mouth. Her chest didn't hurt, but the fire in her stomach became more and more uncontrollable. Fu Xing laughed wildly behind her. The Phoenix fire orb is finally on my hands. We can finally start. He wanted to pull his hands, but Shen Li suddenly grabbed him. I said, she gently closed her scarlet eyes, if you want to grab something from this king, you have to offer me your life. She no longer suppressed the burning heat in her abdomen, letting it spread with the blood, burning her limbs. She could feel the blood evaporating every inch, and she knew that she was being slowly burned to death by the fire in her body. She heard Fu Xing screaming behind her, impossible! Impossible! Why doesn't the water stop technique work? The water stop technique. Ah! The plan is ruined. It can't be. All the creatures not far away screamed bitterly, and even those men in black were not immune. The corners of Shen Li's lips twitched slightly. She didn't know the purpose of these people or what they were planning with Mo Fong, but now, she has the 2 masterminds, and also the creatures under them. She could just kill all of them, that way, no matter what conspiracy they have, they can't complete it. In addition to this immediate problem, whether it is for the demon realm, the demon race, or the demon lord, or even the heaven, this would be also good. The fire burned in her heart. Shen Li couldn't help but curl up. Fu Xing behind her no longer made a sound, and Mo Fong couldn't breathe. She finally couldn't help letting out a painful grunt. It hurts. Until now, she didn't dare to show a trace of weakness, but the pain was too much. She wants the Azure King, Shen Li, to be remembered for her heroic death. The world must not know that in the last moments of her life, she was still the same as an average woman, scared, and could not help but cry. Countless ashes were scattered in the sea, being pushed away by the undulating waves. The sea breeze rose as if blowing in the clouds, where the only gasp remaining in the air was dissipated. In the outer sky, the white hairball rolled on the side of the man with a wide white robe, and between the black and white chess pieces. Xingji was playing against himself. During a moment of contemplation, he picked up the teacup intending to drink, when suddenly he felt a breeze blowing in his face. He inadvertently raised his eyes, and murmured strangely. Today, there is a strange wind in the outer sky. He put down the teacup, and only heard the sound of click. The teacup shattered from the bottom, leaking his content in the chessboard. The tea dripped in a mess. Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 54. The people who attacked the demons and heaven's realm this time have been wiped out by the Azure King. The messenger from the demon's realm was dressed in a plain robe, with his jaw on the ground, and quietly reported to the heavenly emperor. The emperor nodded. Very good, very good. I didn't expect Azure King to be so capable. I would dare to ask where Azure King is now. She was successful in suppressing the evil this time, and I want to give her a good reward. Thank you, Heavenly Emperor, but there's no need. The demon envoy placed his hands on the ground and clenched them into fists. After a long silence, he finally controlled his emotions, and said in grief, The Azure King has been killed in battle. The Heavenly Emperor was stunned for a moment, but before he had time to react, he heard a squeak sound. Someone actually pushed open the door of the celestial conference hall and entered without an invitation. In the backlight, a person in a white robe stood at the door. The people in the room couldn't see the expression on his face. He had been standing there for a long time, seeming to be distracted and in a daze. But when he stepped into the house, his expression was no different from the past. In the backlight, a person in a white robe stood at the door. The people in the room couldn't see the expression on his face. He had been standing there for a long time, seeming to be distracted and in a daze. But when he stepped into the house, his expression was no different from the past. "How come the High God is here?" The emperor stood up to greet him, but Xingji didn't stop as if he hadn't heard the emperor's words. He just stared at the envoy of the demon world and asked, "Just now, who are you talking about?" The envoy saw him and bowed respectfully and said, "Back to the High God, the demon's realm." Shen Li, also known as Azure King, died yesterday on the Eastern Sea. Xingji was silent for a long time, and then shook his head. "Absurd, how can you report such news without verification?" As soon as this statement came out, not only the messenger was stunned, but even the emperor was shocked. The communication between the two realms must be accurate, no one would report unless verified. How can the messenger not know this kind of thing? The messenger bowed to the ground. "If I lied about this humble servant is willing to be struck by 1,000 lightning." Xingji looked cold. "Don't swear before the gods, your wish may be fulfilled." The messenger clenched his fists tightly, his knuckles were white, and his voice couldn't conceal his grief. "High God may not know this, but this servant meant what he said. If I'm lying, then I don't mind being struck by lightning." There was a moment of silence in the room. You couldn't even hear the breath of the people present, it was like a heartbeat that had stopped. "Where is the corpse?" Xingji said. After all that, he had to believe the news. The Azure King died with the enemy in the Eastern Sea. When the corpse disappeared into the sea, it was impossible to find it. The general who rushed away at that time only recovered 2 broken pieces of her spear. There was a moment of silence and then Xingji said, "Where in the Eastern Sea?" "The sea is wide, my lord." After the general who found the broken spear came back, he could no longer find the exact location again. The messenger seemed to feel regret. "No one knows where the king is now." Xing felt like something was passing through his heart, the pain was as if his blood would overflow, and an invisible force was gripping the wound fiercely, trying to stop the blood from exploding but instead, only leaving him without a pulse. But Xingji's complexion was as usual, as if he was feeling nothing, and said to the emperor, "Yesterday, I noticed a slight airflow in the outer sky, and I seemed to feel something was happening in the lower realm. Today I heard that Azure King died in the human realm, and there must be a fierce fight before she lost her life. Azure King is powerful, if they could cause her harm, then the others are a threat and harmful to the human world. I want to explore the lower realm. I don't know what the heavens will do." Saying like that, Xingji left no room for rejection, so the emperor just nodded. "This would be fine, may I find some helpers for you?" "No, they will get in the way." Although it was normal for Xingji to say a few embarrassing words to the emperor, normally he wouldn't be so straightforward. The emperor coughed twice. "So, High God will take care of this, I hope you take care of yourself." When Xingji was about to turn around and go out, the envoy of the demon world called him. "High God, please wait." The general present said that he had heard the spell from the enemy. He used the water stop technique. And as far as the humble messenger knows, in this world, only the High God knows this technique. This humble servant does not doubt the Lord, but stop water technique? Xingji glanced at the envoy. It shouldn't be the real stop water technique. After that, without further explanation, he turned and left. On the way to the lower realm, he thought to himself that not long ago, he was still thinking that Shen Li might become a troublesome existence, so it was better for her to disappear, but he never thought that she would really disappear so easily. He never thought that if she really disappeared, he would feel so empty. Xingji reached the human world in an instant. The emperor was right. He is the high god, and he belongs to the world. This life is no longer his own. He should protect the common people of the three realms and put the overall situation as the most important. He has so many impossibilities in his life. The clouds on the sea were low, the wind was surging, the rainstorm was approaching. Xingji was standing on the eastern sea, watching the sky-turning waves below, listening to the thunder roaring above. Still, for him, the world was silent. Shen Li. He whispered her name, the tight wound in his heart seemed to be suddenly torn apart, and the biting cold wind was infused within his body. He looked around, looking for someone, but the vast sky was desert. Where could he find her? A thunderbolt passed by, and the rainstorm was pouring in an instant. He stood in his white clothes between the sky and the sea, lightning and thunder passing through. Lightning could harm even the body of a god, but he was in the transition of light and shadow at this moment. After the deafening thunder, he suddenly saw a figure struggling in the huge wave. She stretched out her hand and asked him painfully for help. "Please, help," she said before a giant wave buried her head. His pupils shrank. Without thinking, he rushed down almost instinctively. He reached out and fished, only to catch a handful of seawater flowing from his fingers. It was an illusion. The giant wave stopped on its own movement and then rushed forward. He only stared at his empty palm, dumbfounded. In the waves, he could not hear thunder, but each flash of lightning was like a sharp blade that splits time and space, bloodily cutting out the memories related to Shen Li from his mind. Those pictures of joy or anger at this time became a knife to torture him, over and over again, piercing countless holes in his heart. The memories were bleeding out of him, letting him in a panic trying to hold them all tightly. He was covered to death with all of them, like blood rushing out of all his nooks and crannies, and then like the teacup that broke yesterday, that broke and made a mess, making people at a loss and unable to clean up. He suddenly remembered that not long ago, Shen Li was still teasing him, saying that since meeting him, she was always being injured. She said that eventually being near him would kill her. How did he answer? He seemed to say, he would pay her with his life. Shen Li was now asking him to fulfill his promise. The corner of Xingji's lips twitched a chuckle. After the waves passed, Xingji was completely drenched. Shen Li. You took it too seriously. He raised his arm and touched the waves that just hit him with his fingertips. A white light flashed, and the thunder clouds in the sky suddenly became much closer. The temperature was lower, and his lips opened slightly. He whispered a spell softly, and an extremely cold light swept across the sea and sky. In just a moment, thousands of miles of the sea had frozen into ice. Xingji stood on the undulating sea, but at this moment, what was under his feet was an ice surface as hard as bluestone. The waves were still in the shape of the waves, but they were no longer flowing. The thunderclouds scattered in the sky and the raindrops turned into ice particles, rustling down, rolling everywhere. There was no sound between the sea and the sky, as if everything had returned to silence. Xingji quietly stepped on the ice, and with every step a golden light flashed, wavering several feet away. He seemed to be looking for something, focusing only on his feet. He thought that even if Shen Li was turned into ashes, he would still find her ashes in the ocean. He walked forward step by step, not distinguishing the time, the day, and the night. Every step was focused on Shen Li. But the eastern sea had no end. No matter how long he walked, in front of him was only this frozen sea, nothing else. High God! A person in front of him blocked his way. he looked up at her. What's the matter? Yulan quietly knelt down on the ice. I hope High God will understand the sufferings of the common people. The Eastern Sea has been frozen for 10 days and 10 nights. The lives of the Eastern Sea are miserable, High God. Seeing Xingji's eyes were red because of the long absence of rest, Yulan with pale lips, lowered her eyelids and said softly, I'm sorry for your loss. This shouldn't have been said to the god. Gods cannot be emotional, they are people who have no sorrow. Since there is no sorrow, how can she be sorry for his loss? Xingji looked at the endless sea in the distance and smiled quickly. Is it obvious? Yulan bowed her head and dared not answer. Xingji stopped and took 2 steps forward. In the past, I never knew how big the 3 realms were. With the body of a god, wherever I go, it is a momentary thing. However, only now I know that the 3 realms are so big that even Eastern Sea is too big. He smiled, it's also God's will if I can't find it. After saying that, he waved his hand, the water stop technique was withdrawn, the atmosphere between heaven and earth changed greatly, and the ice on the sea slowly dissipated. With the removal of the spell, Xingji felt a pain in his chest. By freezing the Eastern Sea, he finally rebelled against the heavenly will. Now he was paying the price. A mouthful of blood gushed out from his throat. Yulan was shocked, but came forward and supported Xingji. High God, are you okay? Xingji shook his head and wanted to say, it's okay, but when he opened his mouth, another mouthful of blood came out, falling on the ice that hadn't melted yet. Xingji grinned. With a smile, he stretched out his hand to wipe the blood from his mouth. How could he have thought in this life that he would still be so embarrassed? It turned out that this was the taste of being bitten by the power of heaven. After hiding all this time, after all, he couldn't avoid it. If he had known, he would have treated Shen Li a little better, at least, he could have protected her from those serious injuries. He could have told her that he liked her. It's a pity that he couldn't say it anymore. It's a pity that Shen Li couldn't hear it anymore. Welcome to my channel, this is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 55. In the gloomy room, only the fire from the corner was crackling, projecting her shadow on the stone wall behind, illuminating the shape of a big X. Her hands and feet were all pulled by heavy, mysterious iron chains. Her wrists and ankles weren't fixated by handcuffs but with nails, as thick as thumbs, which were pierced directly in her bones. All her limbs were painful, and even if she didn't move, the weight of her body made her wrists unbearable. The joints had swelled a lot, and the wound around the nails was black and ulcerated. It made people unbearable to look closely. The hanging person seemed to have passed away at this time, with no breath. But the person opposite her knew that within a short while, this woman would wake up again. Her vitality was always surprisingly strong. Cough, cough, cough. As he was thinking this, the woman opposite suddenly coughed violently, as if she was about to cough up her internal organs. Her voice alarmed the guards outside and only heard a few yells. Hey, Azure King is awake again. Go and tell the Lord to come. It's your turn to go. The Lord's resurrection took longer than ever. During the past 2 days, his body was upset and his temper was bad. I went there twice, and I almost lose my head last time. It's your turn to report this time. TSK. Okay, guard the door closely. The outside quieted down. The person inside looked at the woman across from the 2 iron fences, and muttered. Why I have to be here? She fights and fights every day, as if she doesn't even feel pain. I hate it, it makes me sick. Knowing that the people who trapped me are not happy, I feel relieved. The other party said this in a faint voice, causing Bei Xiaoyan's mouth to twitch, and say dissatisfied. Azure King Shen Li, today you are not deaf, and your voice is good, okay? It's rare for a day to have such a beautiful beginning. Can't you talk a little louder? Shen Li hung her head and sneered, this kind of ghost place, no day will be beautiful, so every day, I hope I will lose my senses. Bei Xiaoyan bent over and spied Shen Li's eyes that were blocked by her hanging hair, and said, well, I can't see your eyes today. How about smell and touch? As long as the sense of touch is not there, you can survive today. I have to count my blessings, today my 5 senses have been restored by a third, and it turns out that touch is in that percentage. Bei Xiaoyan shivered, he crouched to the corner and shrank. Then you have to hold back, I don't want to hear your screams, while I see flesh and blood flying across the room. It will scare me to death. Shen Li bent her lips and didn't speak anymore. She didn't know how long it had been since the first battle at sea that day, she only faintly heard from Bei Xiaoyan's mouth that it was about 3 months away now. In March. It would be okay if it was in the human world, but if a whole month passed in heaven or the demon world, she was afraid, what happened in this month outside? The people in the demon realm just think that she is dead, and she doesn't know how the demon lord's injuries have recovered, or whether the order of the city was restored to normal. Puya and the parrot will be sad when they know that she has been killed in battle. And in the outer sky, that high god, would he be indifferent as always? Suddenly a sordid desire was formed in her head. She wanted to take a look at his expression, she wanted to see the look on Xingji's face when he heard she disappeared, but now, she could only think about it. There are too many burdens on Xingji, he can't lose that indifferent face, even if the entire world were sad, he can't be moved. This is the attitude that a god should have. Shen Li calmed down, putting aside her mixed thoughts. She didn't know when she was imprisoned there. The flames of that day were the last scene she remembered. When she woke up again, she had been arrested, and her body seemed to be quite different from before. Her body seemed empty, no matter how she wanted to mobilize her mana, there was no breath. Just like a mortal who has never practiced, but her skin and flesh are much stronger than before, and the temperature was always extremely hot, burning. Although she couldn't feel it herself, Bei Xiaoyan threw a few pieces of mud from the ground at her, but everything that touched her body was directly roasted and scattered into gravel. Therefore, the extremely cold mysterious iron was used to lock her, and only this thing was suppressing the burning qi in her body. Even if Shen Li wanted to escape from this place, she couldn't rely on her strong and hot skin. Without magic power, she couldn't do anything. Even more troublesome than her lack of powers were her 5 senses: sight, smell, hearing, touch, taste, and vocal cords. Every day, she has several senses that disappear inexplicably. Sometimes she couldn't see, others, she couldn't hear. Or like now, 2 senses disappeared, 3 senses appeared, and they changed every day, which made her feel annoyed. But considering that she couldn't even move, her 5 senses were not as important as usual to her. After the first few days, Shen Li got used to it. Sometimes when she was severely beaten in the interrogation, Shen Li even felt a little thankful that they disappeared from time to time. The lack of pain and thick skin made her feel a lot better. Seeing that the other party tried his best to torture her, but she didn't feel anything. She only despised him with cold eyes. Every time she thought of such a scene, she felt an inevitable sense of superiority in her heart. Shen Li was thinking about this when she heard a kara sound. Suddenly, the man in black led the man in a green robe into the dungeon, slowly. A flame was imprinted on the person's face, and the light and shadow intertwined on it, making his burned wrinkled skin look even more frightening and disgusting. However, today Shen Li doesn't have to face this terrible face. How is the king today? His hoarse voice pierced Shen Li's eardrums, but Shen Li just sneered and ignored him. It was Fu Xing. The person who tortured her these days was also the person who arrested her. After experiencing that kind of roasting, Shen Li survived. After all, she was a phoenix, a talented one, she wasn't afraid of fire. But she couldn't believe that this guy also survived. Shen Li even wondered if everything that day was a dream made up by herself. She wondered if it was all her imagination, that the spy who betrayed the demon world was Mo Fong, that she fought Fu Xing at sea, and that she burnt herself on the sea. However, after a few days trapped there, when she'd occasionally recovered her hearing, she heard the small chats of the guards outside the door and some whispers from Bei Xiaoyan's mouth. So Shen Li knew that everything was real, and she really burned. Mo Fong is a real spy, and Fu Xing is a real, immortal. He actually possesses the power of resurrection, so he can resurrect himself over and over again without hurting the vital points. Only then did Shen Li know that his name, Fu Xing, actually meant resurrection. Really a difficult guy, but fortunately, she burned him, and now he was like a ghost of what he used to be. His mana is not as good as before. Almost all of those creatures were burned clean by her, and even Mo Fong was burned by her. They had to give up their plans for now, and could be said to have suffered heavy losses. They couldn't even go out and do evil, for the time being. At least, this would give the demon realm a little time to recuperate. With this extra time, they could take advantage to establish a deeper connection with the heavenly army, even if the heavenly soldiers are no longer useful. No matter what, the demon soldiers could steal their heavenly magical weapons and use them, and their combat power could be increased by at least 10 times. If only she could go back. A trace of pain came from her wrists and ankles, interrupting Shen Li's conception. Even if Shen Li could bear it, no matter how much pain she felt, at this time, she frowned due to the pain. The mysterious iron chain pulling Shen Li's wrists and ankles was struck loudly, and the iron nails that penetrated her bones trembled. Such small vibrations are more nerve-wracking than large-scale shaking. It was itchy and impossible. Scratching, and the pain couldn't be relieved. If she could go back, Shen Li gritted her teeth, enduring the itch and pain. She could only say this in her heart, but she knew that she would never go back. Her only hope was that Fu Xing would hurt her a little harder day by day so that she would die soon. This way, she could get rid of the pain. Then someone took a strong light that was shining in front of Shen Li's eyes, and someone used this firecracker to blast in Shen Li's ears. The sound of the explosion made Shen Li subconsciously tilt her head. Fu Xing grinned coarsely, "I wanted to come back today. I heard that your hearing and touch were restored. Your voice should also be good. Then, Azure King still does not plan to hand over the Phoenix Fire Orb today?" This question again. Although Shen Li hated this person so much and didn't want to answer, she really felt helpless about this issue. "I ate it," she said. She knew that the Phoenix Fire Orb mentioned by these people's mouth was the blue sea blue bead that the Demon Lord gave her. But according to the Demon Lord, it was born with her, and she also ate it according to what the Demon Lord said. But Fu Xing now asked her to surrender the bead that had been digested for a long time. Shen Li smiled and mocked, "You come and take." As soon as Fu Xing gritted his teeth, he raised his hand to slap Shen Li. However, the hands in his robe were still covered with traces of being burned. He forcibly resisted his anger. Since Azure King refuses to cooperate, she will suffer more of the bitterness of flesh and blood. After he said that, he raised his hand, and the attendant next to him proposed the mysterious iron whip he had prepared. Fu Xing covered his mouth and coughed twice and stepped aside, and then was nothing more than a flogging. Shen Li held her head down. Bei Xiaoyan in the cage opposite was paler than Shen Li. Seeing her like this, he seemed to see himself like this. He shrank in the corner, trying not to attract the attention of outsiders. But when Fuxing turned his head, he still saw him curled up in the corner. "Don't be afraid. You cooperate with us in this way, knowing that you can say nothing, and we will not treat the third prince badly." Bei Xiaoyan nodded. He was so scared that he did not dare to take a breath. The flogging continued until Fuxing was tired. He waved his hand and left the dungeon first, the attendants followed. The cell door was locked, and only the torch was left, he and Shen Li. Seeing Shen Li covered in blood, Bei Xiaoyan was a little bit afraid to speak. The cell was quiet for a long time. Instead, Shen Li first asked, "You told them all the information of Beihai. They seized the royal power of Beihai and turned the Beihai clan into a puppet, yet, the third prince has no guilt?" Bei Xiaoyan said with a shiver, "I naturally feel guilty, but I can't help it. I'm not you, I can't bear such pain, and my concubine mother is guilty. I have been discriminated against by others since I was a child. The Beihai royal family has no affection for me. I betrayed them, but it was also a helpless act." Shen Li said hoarsely, "Everyone has hardships, but it is still a betrayal. It is hard to be forgiven." Bei Xiaoyan said silently, "If it is the world or themselves, people would still choose themselves. Why you have to be tough with them? It's already like this, you can just give him whatever he wants." Shen Li's body was hanged on 2 iron chains. Even in this situation, she laughed, "I really ate it. I'm not lying." Bei Xiaoyan looked at her like she was a monster. Shen Li only said, "The third prince need not worry, this king is invincible." Bei Xiaoyan lowered his head and muttered, "I really don't understand you. You can still laugh in this situation." Of course, she can laugh, she has been trained. After sitting down for an unknown period of time, Bei Xiaoyan gradually became sleepy and sank into his dreams. After hearing a few crisp sounds, Bei Xiaoyan was startled. He opened his eyes and saw a man in black standing in front of Shen Li. He clenched his fists, raised and lowered his hands in Shen Li's ears, as if he wanted to touch her but didn't dare to touch. "My king," he called out sadly, extremely hoarse. With a purple sword in his hand, he cut off the profound iron that trapped Shen Li's limbs, and hugged the unconscious Shen Li into his arms. "I will take you out." These 5 words were dumb but resolute, and no one could refute them. Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 56. Shen Li woke up amidst the turbulence, and she saw the scenery in front of her eyes. She could smell the scent of grass and wind. She thought to herself, her senses of sight and smell are restored today. But what did Fuxing plan now? Is this a new way to torture her? The illusion in front of her was like the outside world, so vivid and free, she couldn't help but yearn for it. Obviously, she had only been imprisoned for a while, but to Shen Li, these sceneries were like things from a previous life, distant. She moved her fingertips, wanted to stretch out her hand, and wanted to recall the feeling of the wind passing through her fingertips. The surrounding scene suddenly stopped, and Shen Li saw that she was in a forest now. A face that surprised her appeared in her vision, Mo Feng. It turned out that this was not an illusion, it was Mo Feng who saved her. Why? After betraying the demon world, did he also betray Fuxing? The corners of her lips trembled, as if she was trying to say something. In the end, she just shook her head and pushed the man away slightly. The mysterious iron nail on the wrist had not been taken out yet. It was this light effort in pushing him that made Shen Li almost fall. She didn't feel any pain today, but her body still convulsed. Mo Feng hurriedly put her down. He let her sit down, leaning against the tree, and then knelt down on his knees, silently bowing his head in front of her, as if confessing guilt and apologizing. Shen Li closed her eyes, as he was completely invisible. Actually, she could speak, but she will continue to act like now, only because she has nothing to say to Mo Fong. The generals of the demon realm, the corpses that were placed in the coffins with their rags and swords, have already drawn a clear line between them. In Shen Li's heart, the brother who had marched with her and that risked his life with her has already died in that war. He made sure of it. This is the result he wants, and Shen Li will respect the result of his choice. Kneeling in front of her now is the enemy of the demon clan, who slaughtered the demons and killed the demon generals. If she had the means to it, she would fight him right at this moment. Mo Fong knelt for a long time, intending not to get up before Shen Li called him, but the slight vibration from the ground made Mo Fong's face frown a little bit. He knew that he could not delay any longer. If he did not leave it this time, he was afraid no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't help Shen Li escape. He squatted his head severely at the moment. "My king, I'm sorry for this insult." He got up, took Shen Li, hugged her, and continued walking. Walking through the woods and passing the last row of trees, there was a white stone beach outside. Mo Fong placed Shen Li next to the two beach boulders and asked her to sit on the stone. He wanted to say more, but the ground trembling was more and more obvious. Mo Fong only gritted his teeth secretly, picked up a stone at random, made a decision, and shaped the stone into Shen Li's appearance. Holding it in his arms, he turned around and ran to the other side without looking back. Only then did Shen Li slowly open her eyes. She did not look at the direction Mo Fong left. Instead, she looked at the clouds on the horizon that were being blown by the sea wind. Her eyes were dim. The sky was getting darker, and the glow of the sea and sky turned in one. Like a dream. Shen Li narrowed her eyes slightly, becoming more sleepy. The stars changed and the morning sun was born. The first ray of sunlight across the sea calmly fell on Shen Li's face. She was motionless and slept very deeply. There was a slow footstep on the beach that creaked the sand. When he walked around the boulder, his shadow was stretched by the light. He walked a few steps towards the beach. Suddenly his figure stopped, turned his head, and saw the silhouette of the one who was trapped in the two stones sleeping soundly. Xingji stopped blankly there, unable to move forward for a while, fearing that if he moved, the image would disappear. It wasn't until Shen Li coughed twice, and the trembling air swayed in front of her that he realized that it was not an illusion, but a living Shen Li. He stepped forward because he hurried. He stepped on the hem of his clothes and almost fell. However, when he approached Shen Li, he slowed down and half-kneeled in front of her. "Shen Li." He stretched out his hand and touched her cheek with his fingertips. Her hot skin hurt fingers, burning from his fingertips all the way to the tip of his heart. But he didn't let go. The entire palm of his hand was pressed on her face, holding her cheek, gently rubbing. "Shen Li." He whispered to her as if he had forgotten everything except her name. This was Shen Li, the demon king who everyone thought died in battle, the woman who would never come back. It was really Shen Li. The burning pain spread, but Xingji felt happy for the pain. He breathed quickly. He pressed his forehead lightly against Shen Li's forehead. Her body temperature was too hot, even for Xingji, but he only smiled, like he was delirious. He pushed Shen Li's head into his arms, and smiled softly in the temperature that was almost burning him up. He whispered softly in her ear, "You saved my life." But after a while, Shen Li never woke up. Her breath was extremely weak. Xingji let go of her a little bit, trying to feel her pulse, but when his eyes fell on her wrist, he saw the black profound iron still piercing her bones. He stopped for a moment. After he understood something, Xingji's breathing paused. He glanced blankly across her limbs. When he saw that her limbs were also pierced, his breathing stagnated for a long time, and his face turned pale. "What are you? Why didn't you take better care of yourself?" He lowered his head and looked at Shen Li's hand. For some reason, he didn't dare to touch it, but how could he understand her injury without touching it? He had to do it. His eyelids drooped slightly, and the fingertips touched her limp palm, but with a light touch, Shen Li's hand convulsed subconsciously. When Xingji's wrist and hers rubbed slightly, Shen Li's throat made a muffled groan, and she clenched her teeth. Her frowned brows told of her pain. Xingji's heart tightened, and white cold air condensed in the palms holding Shen Li's wrists. The expression on her face immediately eased a lot. She almost never showed her pain in front of people. If it weren't for her to be in her sleep, she might not show it at all. Xingji was angry and really wanted to give Shen Li a severe lesson. This Azure King was always too proactive for her own good. However, when he saw that Shen Li continued to fall asleep even after experiencing such pain, as if she was used to it, for a moment, he couldn't even remember to breathe. He only felt that the apex of his heart shrank, and the blood squeezed the pain in his heart to the limbs. He couldn't control the trembling arc of his fingers for a while. All this time, she must have been extremely sad. Because no one could protect her, so she had to do her best to endure. "I will protect you," he whispered. The hand stroking Shen Li's cheeks was extremely soft, but his expression was firm without hesitation. "In the future, I will not care about the collapse of the sky and the destruction of the three realms. I will protect you without fear." His voice fell, suddenly feeling that the person in his arms was breathing slightly differently. She turned her head and woke up. Shen Li's eyes were pitch black, she couldn't see anything, and there was no sound in her ears, but her sense of touch told her that there was a person in front of her, and her sense of smell could smell the heavy smell of the sea. "I can go by myself," she said coldly. "Today, you and I are strangers. If we meet on the battlefield next time, I will not show mercy to your men. You will either kill me today or leave me alone." The person on the other side did not answer. Naturally, even if the other party answered, she would not hear it today. But the person in front of her did not move. Shen Li could feel him near her. Cold fingers touched her eyes lightly. Shen Li frowned, and turned her head away, while that hand reluctantly pinched her ears. Shen Li was slightly angry, trying to raise her hands to stop him, but as soon as her arms moved, a deep pain surged in, making her face even whiter. After gritting her teeth and enduring this wave of pain, Mo Fong finally let go of her. Shen Li said, "Mo Fong, if you still remember a trace of the past in your heart, let me go." Shen Li's always had very high self-esteem. At this time, enduring Mo Fong is due to the fact they are in the enemy's territory, but also because she still has her self-esteem and pride. Her five senses disappeared all at once, and she was unable to act. She had to be supported by someone even when she raised her hand to walk. She was so embarrassed that she didn't want others to see it. The person on the opposite side was silent for a long time, before reaching out his hand to wrap her neck. Shen Li was startled, and before she knew what he was going to do, she was caught by his other hand. He actually hugged her horizontally, the mysterious iron on her hands and feet rubbed against his bones as he walked, but Shen Li was even more frightened by this holding posture. She and the Mo Fong have been on the battlefield many times, and when they were injured or was inconvenient to move, Mo Fong also helped her, but they either helped her walk or carried her in his back, or even carried it on his shoulders, but never tried to carry her like this. This attitude. Such a posture. She had once seen a certain general carry his wife into the bridal chamber like this. Therefore, she was a little bit resistant to this posture, being held in such a hug, like being treated as those little daughters-in-law. It felt awkward. Shen Li was furious, exhausting the last bit of breath in her body. She yelled, "Bold! Let me go down." The man ignored it, and Shen Li realized that something was wrong. This wasn't like Mo Fong's ordinary attitude. Even after the betrayal, he came to rescue her and treated her respectfully. When he left yesterday, he still bowed before her. How could he become so slutty in just one day? An extremely ominous thought arose in Shen Li's heart. The place where Mo left her was the seaside. There might be some human villages and towns nearby. Today, the guy who touched and hugged her was probably a mountain fisherman. This kind of human rough guy. She smelled the strong smell of the sea on this person. Shen Li made a decision and her face became harder to look like. Now that he is holding herself like this, is it probably because he intends to do the same as the general holding his wife? He dared to do this. The more Shen Li thought about it, the more anxious she became, and with all her strength, she raised her elbow and hit the fisherman's throat fiercely. The fisherman paused, and Shen Li struggled to escape from his arms, but before she could escape, the pain in her limbs made her convulse. She could bear the pain mentally, but her body was already overloaded. She was shaking constantly, and suddenly she felt that she had been changed to a new position. The man seemed to find a place to sit down. He let her sit in his arms, and then he held her waist with one hand and patted her back with the other. It was like caressing with pity, and it was like telling her, "It's okay, I won't hurt you, I will protect you." Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 57. Shen Li hasn't recovered her vision for 3 days in a row. She was in prison before, and both her arms and legs were locked. It didn't matter whether she could see or hear, but now she was outside. In a strange place, she urgently needs to understand the surrounding environment. Where is it? Is it safe? How far is it from the devil, and how far is it from where she escaped? The most important thing is that she wants to know who the one who rescued her was. She has no magic power and can't detect the depth of the other party's power. She can only understand some scattered and shallow information through the occasional smooth facial features, such as the other party is a man. He should be a fisherman. He doesn't like to talk. In these 3 days, even when her hearing was restored, she didn't hear anything from him. Judging from her intuition, this person should be harmless, but for people who have not yet met, Shen Li still has some caution in her heart, and what makes Shen Li most puzzled is why he wants to save her. Not looking for money or showing off, and taking care of everything without asking for anything is the most suspicious thing in Shen Li's eyes now. There were footsteps outside, and Shen Li opened her eyes, but she was still blind for now. The black iron on her hands and feet made her unable to move. At this time, she was a useless person and could only lie on the bed to be served by someone. This made her feel extremely decayed, even considered killing this fisherman and never let anyone else know about it. There was a faint sound. This man moved very softly, unlike those rude wild men. Shen Li smelled the food and was about to eat. "I don't know whether it is noon or night," she muttered unconsciously. She didn't intend to be answered, but there was a sound of putting down the bowl of food. And a slightly hoarse male voice said, "Noon." This voice was strange and tight, and Shen Li froze for a moment. He responded to her, so she continued to ask, "Where is this?" "The beach." He paused and added a few more words, "On the Eastern Sea." Mo Fong actually sent her to the Eastern Sea. Could it be that he was expecting someone to pick her back? The demon lord's behavior and style are both clear to Mo Fong, and he will never hold back once he has confirmed that she died. The demon lord never had any unrealistic illusions. She has been missing for such a long time. All the demons must have confirmed that she is dead by now. So it is impossible that he would send someone to find her. As for the heaven, no one will come to find her. Shen Li couldn't help but think of Xingji. Although after she met Xingji, she seemed to be injured all the time, every time he would show up to save her, but now. A spoonful of rice soup was placed next to Shen Li's mouth, and the taste was delicate and fragrant. Shen Li felt extremely hungry, and felt that although this soup was not the best she ever had, it was pretty good for a mortal. She moved her fingers and said, "I'll do it myself." But when she moved her shoulders and was about to get up, her body was already cramping, and her limbs pulled her back to the slate bed like rocks, making her unable to move. She felt no pain today, only a feeling of weakness and decadence rose from the bottom of her heart. Azure King, Shen Li. When has she been so embarrassed? With a soft sigh, the fisherman fed the rice soup into her mouth without saying anything else. Shen Li quietly drank the rice soup fed by the fisherman and finished a bowl. The other side said, "You want more?" Shen Li was silent for a long time before saying, "These 4 profound irons are formed by the combination of the inside and the outside chains. The inner iron core was wrapped inside my body. At that time, they used the inner iron core to pass through the bones and flesh, and then attached the outer profound iron together, tightening the two, 1 iron chain at each end, so that I could not break free." Her tone was indifferent, and her tone hardly fluctuated, saying as if the person who had been pierced through was not herself. "Fleeing for the past few days, the link between the chains has been loosened, and I want you to help me separate them, so I can free myself. It may be a little ugly, but if you help me with this king is willing to accept your wish and repay you." The other party did not respond for a long time. Shen Li couldn't see the other party's expression and didn't know how the other party would answer, so she felt the time she waited a long time. "Okay." He responded with just 1 word, but it seemed as if he had made greater determination than her. "If so, you can help me, before my sense of touch returns." The fisherman tidied up other things, put a pot of hot water next to Shen Li's bed, and then put his hand on her wrist. Shen Li smiled and said, "I didn't expect you to be so meticulous in your work. Do you have any notion of cultivation? If you want to become an immortal, after we treat my wounds, I can help you." The other party chuckled, "I think, being an immortal, it's not so good these days." Shen Li seemed to feel something. The immortals are extremely at ease, the most uncomfortable in the heavenly realm. "I'm afraid it's just one person." The fingertips on Shen Li's wrist trembled slightly, but he didn't speak anymore. He grasped the protruding profound iron on both ends of Shen Li's wrist and tried to untangle it. The twist was indeed loosened. If she could apply a little more force, the mortal should also easily twist it. The fisherman's 2 twists have caused a thin sweat on Shen Li's forehead. She closed her eyes and adjusted her breath as soon as possible. She won't give up, but her body has a limit. The other party worked hard and unscrewed the profound iron and the iron core in it. Shen Li had a few drops of blood leaking out of her blue and white wrists as if the blood was about to dry up. If she took this thing any later, she probably wouldn't be able to use her hands and feet anymore. The profound iron from one wrist was pulled out and hit the ground heavily. It seemed to be extremely hot. When it fell on the ground, only a soft sound of chi sounded, the white air rose, and then quickly cooled down. The man seemed to feel nothing and continued to unscrew the profound iron in Shen Li's other wrist with his bare hands. However, Shen Li was convulsing at this time. There was no time to pay attention to these details. She only felt that the blood in her body was flowing extremely fast, the heartbeat seemed to explode, it was extremely difficult to breathe, and the brain gradually became chaotic, adding many messy pictures to her already dark mind. She seemed to see that when she was very young, the demon lord taught her spear skills and spells, and there was a gloomy eye next to them watching them. Shen Li was inexplicably flustered. She stepped back 2 steps, turned around, and ran. But when she turned her head, she saw that Mo Fong was already standing behind her, looking at her coldly. Behind Mo Fong, that one-eyed ghost floated there, chilling, just like Mo Fan. He was looking coldly at her. Mo Fang's eyes gradually became a little different from the original. The light from those eyes became colder and colder. Shen Li's heart tightened. She turned and ran in the other direction. The road ahead seemed to have no end, just endless darkness. Behind her, strange laughter kept coming, as if to push her into a desperate situation. Shen Li was almost out of breath. She simply stopped and waved her hand, trying to grab the silver spear and fight the incoming person, but only heard 2 clicks, and the 2 pieces of her spear fall in front of her. She froze for a moment, and the laughter behind her became closer. Shen Li gritted her teeth and turned her head, waiting to see who the evildoer was. But the laughter stopped abruptly, and the surrounding air was silent as if nothing was there, but that only lasted for a moment. Soon she saw that there was a small slit in front of her, and the wind blew out gently. Shen Li slowly looked up, only to find that this was actually the gate of Su Tianyuan. Suddenly, the one-eyed ghost floated over, staring at Shen Li with cold eyes. Shen Li gasped with horror. "I will kill the gods," he said grimly. "I will kill the gods. I will kill the gods." The sound became louder and louder, and Shen Li was shocked. "Shut up." She squeezed uncomfortably. She said only these 2 words, but black miasma came out from the gap in the gate of Su Tianyuan. Shen Li was forced to retreat by the miasma. The voice grew louder and Shen Li shouted, "Shut up." Her eyes flashed, and crimson flames rose from her body as if she was about to burn out everything. "Shen Li." A soft and cold call came from the other side. She looked to the side with red eyes, still in the small courtyard under the vine frame. The man in white clothes was lying on the bamboo rocking chair. He stretched out her hand. "Come and get some sun." He said it lightly as if he hadn't seen the chaos on her side. Shen Li stared at him blankly, and then looked sideways at the raging fire all over her body. She shook her head. "If I don't go there, I will harm you." The smile on the face of the person over there did not diminish, but he took his hands back. Shen Li dropped her head quietly. As Shen Li burned her body, she suddenly felt a hint of coolness covering her whole body. She looked up in a daze. The man had walked to her, then smiled and hugged her into his arms. Patting her back gently, comforting her like a child. "I'm safe, it's okay." The crimson in Shen Li's eyes slowly faded. She knew that she should lead this embrace, and her responsibilities and his responsibilities were compelling. The 2 should drift away, but, may God be kind and forgive her for being unable to break free and ignore him at this moment. Just let her finish the stream. She relaxed her body, allowing him to support her body. In the emptiness of darkness, she seemed to melt into him. Opening her eyes, the sunlight was a little dazzling, and Shen Li saw someone sitting on a chair by the table. He was falling asleep deeply with his head supported by one hand. The wide white robe dragged the ground. The green jade hairpin was loosely holding a few strands of black silk hair that covered half of his cheek. In the backlight, he was too beautiful. Which fisherman could look so tragically nice? Shen Li's heart moved, and she didn't know what expression she should make for a while, but after a long period of days, she grinned silently. "I can't believe it. I was really picked up by you again. Fate is so unkind. How could we 2 be so fateful?" All the profound iron on her limbs had been taken out, and the wound was wrapped in white cloth strips, which were not human fabrics. It seemed that the cloth had been torn from his body. The wounds on the limbs all felt cold, and they had been treated by him. Shen Li turned her head, closed her eyes, and stopped looking at Xingji. How could she not know what Xingji was thinking? He knew that if Shen Li knew that the person taking care of her was him, she would definitely ask to leave immediately. It was as decisive as when he said goodbye that day. They are also aware of each other's responsibilities, and they know each other so well that they could guess what choices the other party will make. But Xingji never thought that Shen Li would also be weak and want to indulge in warmth sometimes. Shen Li didn't open her eyes. She didn't want to see what would be his behavior right now. The memory of her was still there, vivid. She would be kind to Xingji for now, forgiving him for letting go of responsibility. Just this once. Until her wound was healed, she would no longer be the Azure King. She is willing to be just Shen Li, picked up from the beach by a fisherman with a hoarse voice, and then spend some time peacefully. Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 58. Xingji listened to Shen Li walking slowly and stepping to boil water outside. He estimated the time and figured that the water was almost ready. Shen Li suddenly said to him, "I can see things today. I didn't believe that even though you are a fisherman, the house would be so well arranged. This is very good." The white clothes flashed by on the side of the door, and the figure dodged to the side. Shen Li heard a clamor and sounds of ding and clank, thinking that the people outside were in a panic. After all of that, this scene was just embarrassing. Shen Li waited for a long time and there was no sound outside, but she could imagine the frowning and wry smile of Xingji. It was so comfortable. Shen Li tilted her head inward and bent her mouth. After she had enough fun, she stepped in. When she turned her head, she saw a dark young man dressed in coarse linen, really like a fisherman working by the sea all year round. Shen Li blinked and heard him say in the hoarse voice she was used to these days, "Girls' eyes are better?" Shen Li looked at him carefully. "My 5 senses come and go. Today, my senses of taste, smell, and touch are broken, but it's a lucky day to be able to hear and see." The youth frowned slightly. "Why is this?" "I don't know the specific reason. I couldn't do this before, so let me do this now." Shen Li stared into his eyes, and said, "Thank you, son, for taking care of me and taking off the chains out of my limbs. I really troubled you. I don't want to impose, but I'm still unable to move freely. I'm afraid I have to ask you to take care of me for a few more days." He gave an understatement, then sat down and took a teacup to drink tea, but as if he felt that he shouldn't have agreed so fast, he took a meal with the teacup and after pondering for a while, he said with a clear cough, "I have to go to sea every day to work, and the girl is seriously injured. I had delayed a lot of time to take care of the girl a few days ago, and I can't delay it in the next few days." The corners of Shen Li's mouth moved slightly. "I will give you a sum of money." "It's not a matter of money, but of time. You delayed it, but life doesn't wait." Shen Li choked, thinking that she shouldn't accept his words. She thought she was taking advantage of him, but now it seems to be the opposite. But she should continue with the act. He shamelessly said, "It's better to be like this." The girl agreed to grant a wish before, but that was not the time. "Why don't you give me one more?" "What do you want?" "For now your word is enough. If I tell you now I fear the girl won't be able to do it, so keep it for now. So I can help you heal your injuries with all my heart." Shen Li looked at him for a long time. The son was originally such a talkative person. Before the girl was like a person who could die of anger with just a few words. I didn't dare to say much. But now, he finally drank the tea in his hand, and the edge of the cup covered the curve of his lips. "Isn't this because the girl promised me to make a wish?" It was that if Shen Li did not agree, he would throw her out. Shen Li was very clear he wouldn't, but she still looked at him and replied, "Okay, I accept your double wish. As long as I can do it, I will definitely help you achieve it." He put down the teacup. The curvature of his lips remained as usual, but he only smiled for a moment, then he turned his head slightly. Looking at Shen Li's direction, he pursed his lips, changed the smile on his lips, and said, "I have cooked fish soup. Can the girl taste it?" Shen Li nodded, although, even if she eats fish she wouldn't taste it. Eating the soup and drinking water was the same. Even after living in this hut for some time, Shen Li's limbs were hurt too badly, and it was much slower than usual. Her 5 senses still did not recover. She told herself not to worry. But every time someone had to feed her, she hated herself very much, and more importantly. "I want to go to the toilet," Shen Li said hardly in her voice. In fact, they have done this many times, but she didn't know at that time that was Xingji helping her. Shen Li just treated as an ordinary fisherman, she always thought that she could hurt his head to make him forget. But now she knows it is Xingji. First, she is injured and she can't kill him even if she wishes. Second, she is even shyer around him anyway. Third, he is a god, someone who should be prideful, he shouldn't have to do this for anyone. When Shen Li's thoughts were a mess, he took out the chamber pot placed in the corner as usual, and he specially modified Shen Li to make it convenient for her current body so that she could sit on it. Xingji probed into Shen Li's quilt, loosened her belt, and then pulled her pants down. Shen Li's clothes were long. He arranged her clothes in the quilt before removing her from the quilt. He carried her out, put her on the chamber pot, let her sit down, and left the door without changing his face. Shen Li sat and adjusted her emotions for a long time and then relaxed. But the last thing was to clean up, she would rather die than let him do it. Struggling with the pain of the open wound, she cleaned it up by herself, and then drooped her head and shouted, "Okay." She walked in from outside the house again. When he put the quilt on Shen Li, he saw blood oozing out of her wrist, his brow wrinkled slightly and the corners of his mouth moved, but in the end, he said nothing. After each incident, Shen Li always felt awkward for a while. After Xingji set her up, he left the space for her and went to the yard by himself. In fact, he had nothing to do, so he just watched the room in a daze. After some more time, Shen Li was barely able to walk. She was inevitably a little eager to make herself run, but even walking 2 steps was too much and she would fall. It was okay when she didn't have the senses. If it didn't hurt she could just get up and continue walking, but once the sense of touch recovers, if she falls to the ground, the joints of the limbs would be too painful, and if she couldn't bear it, she would have to shake her teeth and stay on the ground for a long time. So every time she practiced walking in the house, she would make sure that Xingji was absent. She was already embarrassed enough, especially in front of Xingji. The time Xingji was absent was getting longer and longer. After breakfast in the morning, no one was seen. Shen Li also practiced moving her limbs day by day, but she couldn't force the recovery speed of her bones and muscles. Shen Li's vision did not recover that day. She touched the table and walked, she was tired, and she wanted to pour some water. When she touched the teapot on the table, she found that her fingers were not under her control. She tried her best to hold the handle of the kettle tightly, but she couldn't. It was more difficult to restore the flexibility of the fingers than to resume walking and running. Those small muscles and bones were not fully restored. It was 100 times more difficult to take a teacup and hold a pair of chopsticks than walking and running. Shen Li was a little stuck at this moment. She desperately wanted to hold the pot handle, but she was unable to succeed. If so, how could she hold a weapon in the future? How could she protect her people? Touching her arm, she let the teacup fall to the ground. The cracking sound was harsh. There was a rush of footsteps outside the door. Shen Li was angry, and with a flick of her hand, she flicked everything out of the table. "Get out." The moment the door opened, the teacup fell on the door frame, cracking the porcelain. The film hit over the person's brow bone, and blood immediately ran out. Xingji stopped without frowning. He stepped forward in 2 steps, grabbed Shen Li, who was about to fall, and helped her to sit by the bed. For a moment, the blood falling from between his eyebrows fell on the back of Shen Li's hand. When she was blind, his touch was always more sensitive than usual. When he turned to clean up the other debris in the house, Shen Li grabbed his hand. Xingji looked back at her. Shen Li's mouth moved, but she never said a word. The hand holding his hand became tighter and tighter, and she refused to let go. He squatted down in front of her and looked up at her slightly. "What's wrong?" Shen Li was silent for a long time, then she turned and slightly bowed her head. I hurt you. I'm sorry." Knowing that Shen Li couldn't see, he smiled softly in front of her. "It's okay." Shen Li didn't let go when he responded like this. "For physical reasons, I've been a little impatient recently." "Yeah." There was silence between the two. I don't know how long later, Shen Li loosened a hand, touched Xingji's face, and poked his cheek with her index finger. "Here, is it hurt?" Xingji allowed her fingers to lie on her face without stopping her. Only smiled and answered, "No." "Here?" "Not there." "Here?" "No." Sensing that he seemed to be playing with herself, Shen Li was slightly angry and poked fiercely. "Here." A feeling of wet fingertips came, but he heard a muffled hum. Shen Li retracted her hand. "I'm sorry, it got in your eyes." Xingji sighed, took her hand, and placed it on the brow bone. "It's here." The blood seemed to flow a lot. Shen Li asked, "Does it hurt?" Xingji remained silent for a while, then nodded. "It hurts." As if it had been cut by a sharp knife, the chilly pain in his brows was followed by a hot pain and a feeling. Shen Li fell silent. "I'll try to control my temper." "You don't need to control yourself." Xingji whispered. "Here, you don't need to have control." He wanted her to act recklessly. After venting her temper, Shen Li calmed down and thought about it. She insisted on practicing every day, but she was no longer so eager for quick success. After practicing this way, her body recovered faster, and her 5 senses were better. When she didn't have the sense of touch, she focused on sight and hearing, and when she didn't have the sense of hearing, her sense of smell was strengthened. After a while, her 5 senses were unexpectedly improved. For Shen Li, this was a victory. One day, when Shen Li was able to walk steadily without holding a chair or table, she suddenly wanted to go outside to see. Unexpectedly, she opened the door and stepped out. It was this step that made her see the behavior of standing in the yard. He did nothing but stood in the sunshine like a young man by the sea and quietly met her. He never left. He has been silently accompanying her in his way. "I'm hungry," Shen Li said. "I cooked fish soup." A very ordinary conversation, but it made her feel warm. Since Shen Li has been able to take care of herself, Xingji really left the yard. He made breakfast early in the morning and put it on the table to let Shen Li get up and eat, and then he packed up and went out to sea with the nearby fishermen. At noon, he returned alone again, carrying the fish that he had caught in the morning, setting firewood on the fire, and cooking lunch for Shen Li. When Shen Li's sense of smell recovered, she could always smell the fishy smell of the sea, but it was different from the original smell. At that time, he was full of the smell of sea breeze, without the slightest fishy smell, as if he was just in the sea for months letting the wind blow in his skin, and now he has everything on his body, salty, fishy, bloody. He is serious about pretending to be a fisherman. Just like when he was reborn as a mortal, although he had his memory intact, he also only focused on doing what mortals should do in life. Shen Li really admired such a mentality of being at ease. Shen Li has been bored recently. After waiting for her trip in the morning, she walked around the yard twice, feeling really bored, and simply stepped out of the yard to see how the nearby fishermen worked. She knew that still, she couldn't walk fast, so when she reached the nearest fishing village, the people who went out fishing in the morning had already returned. They all unloaded the fish from the boat outside, but one just stood on his own boat and looked at something. He was rubbing his eyebrows, seeming to have a headache. Shen Li was a little curious. She walked up the wooden trestle and walked to the place where the boat was parked. "Did you not catch the fish?" Before she finished speaking, Shen Li glanced at the things on his boat, a boat of pearl mussels and exotic treasures, but none of them were edible. Shen Li had not yet recovered her mana, so she couldn't detect the breath of the gods on his body, but the Dragon King is not a stupid one. Knowing that the High God was casting a net on his sea, how can he let go of this good opportunity to give gifts? The fish was also dragged out by the Dragon King. After seeing such a bunch of things, Shen Li couldn't help but laugh out loud. Xingji was still a little unhappy, but seeing Shen Li smiled, he curled his eyebrows. "Why are you here?" "I want to see how the fish are caught." Shen Li pointed to his boat without a fish and said, "But it seems that you didn't fish today." He stopped and nodded. "Yes, I deliberately added these things today." This person really didn't even hiccup when lying. Shen Li sat down on the trestle bridge. "Let me see, so many babies, take a few to sell for money." Xingji shook his head and only picked up a few pearl mussels. "Too many are useless, so I'll throw them back into the sea in the afternoon." "Don't." Shen Li called to him, "I'll choose a few first." She hurriedly jumped into the fishing boat. He tried to help her while she walked, but the fisherman who came back and forth afterward walked in a hurry. Someone didn't pay attention to bumping into Shen Li, and Shen Li went straight down, slammed into his arms. She was hugged firmly, her chest pressed against his chest, and she could almost feel the other's heartbeat. This hug was as warm and safe as in that dream. Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 59. The hug was too real and the heartbeat was too crazy. Shen Li was shocked by her own heartbeat. She tried hard to stop, but she almost tripped over the fishing net behind her. He sighed, "So reckless. If you fall into the water, who do you have to rely on to save you?" As soon as he said that, he stopped for a moment. He turned his head and coughed unnaturally, but Shen Li seemed to have not heard what he said. She only looked down at the treasure in the boat and said, "Can I choose for myself?" Xingji looked at Shen Li's profile with some surprise, and then softened his gaze. "Well, if you can find something you like, I will give it to you." Shen Li looked at the clamshells in his hand. Although she had been in the heavens for a short time, she already knew that Xingji was a person who never accepted gifts. Picking up one or two from the Dragon King was meant to give the Dragon King a face. But if he accepts it all, it holds a different meaning. Shen Li didn't respond to him, but just buried her head in search for a while. In a boat of jewels, there was only one white round stone that looked a little more rustic. Shen Li picked it up and said, "It looks like this stone is just right. I want it, and everything else is up to you." Xingji nodded. "I'll change the pearls for a few fish, and then let's go home for dinner." The two climbed up the wooden trestle and stopped. They were looking for someone to exchange the pearls, but Xing just said a few words to an honest fisherman, and a strange voice came from beside him. "This little brother is fishing for clamshells again." The person stepped forward. He glared fiercely at the honest fisherman. The fish in the fisherman's hand was about to be handed over to Xingji. When he glared at the fisherman shrank his hand, but the man still pushed him directly and said in disgust, Go, you greedy thing is blocking Lao Tzu's way." The fisherman hurriedly took the fish, gave a look of apology to Xingji, and then left quickly. The gaze of Xingji then slowly fell on the person. He smiled calmly, and saw him lifting the belt of his pants, saying, "I guess you don't know who I am." I'm the eldest son of the village chief, Wang Bao. I see that my little brother exchanges mussel shells for fish every day. I think you don't like mussel shells. It just so happens that there is a lot of fish in my place. You can trade with me. These mussel shells here and those on your boat, give it to me. No. Xingji said indifferently, I want to throw it away. He was really telling the truth, but in Wang Bao's ears, another meaning emerged. His voice was slightly raised, bold. I am the eldest son of the village chief. Why did you want to throw away those treasures and refused to give them to me? Do you have an opinion about me? If you have an opinion about me, you have an opinion about the village chief. Be careful, I can destroy you. Shen Li behind him squinted her eyes. She couldn't see the guy who bullied Xingji, but she just wanted to scold him. Xingji pulled her hand as if he didn't see the arrogant and domineering person in front of him. He pulled Shen Li and left. Wang Bao was furious, and stood in front of Xingji blocking his passage. Stop. Didn't you hear this uncle talking to you? As soon as his voice fell, his gaze happened to fall on Shen Li, who was standing behind Xingji. Today, what Shen Li was wearing was what Xingji arranged for her. The cotton white clothes that he brought had a lot of patches, her face was haggard, and she looked a little weak. The person's eyes lit up immediately, and he looked up and down. Shen Li, you could give me that wife of yours, to show me some courtesy. Shen Li sneered. If she was not injured, she might have stepped on this rude man right there. You have a good eye. Xingji's voice was faint, a bit more chill than usual. Shen Li was aware of it. In her opinion, Xingji was originally a god who rarely revealed the true emotions in his heart. And when he did show, he would be very selective about where, when, and whom would see it. But at this moment, Shen Li was keenly aware that Xingji's emotions were not calculated. I should commend you for having such a pair of eyes. Before the words fell, Xingji already punched Wang Bao in the face. He stunned him on the ground without even struggling. Wang Bao closed his eyes and fainted. The place where he was beaten by Xingji was swollen and ugly. Without blinking his eyes, Xingji stepped on Wang Bao's face with one foot, and then continued to walk as nothing happened. Shen Li stared at Xingji in a daze. She stared blankly until Xingshi led Shen Li back to the yard with no expression on his face. He finally said, I was also beaten? Why do you keep looking at me like this? Shen Li blinked and said in a daze, No, I didn't expect you to use such a direct method. He just punched him. Shouldn't Xingji be the kind of person who makes insidious tricks behind people's back? After a pause, a few complicated emotions flashed under his eyes. For a while, he turned to look at Shen Li. He offended you. Shen Li was slightly startled, and said, If it were you, how would you deal with it? I would beat that arrogance out of him. So, I just chose the way you would choose. He turned his head and coughed, seeming to be aggrieved and uncomfortable. He whispered, I thought you would be a little happier this way. Shen Li looked at his back and was slightly stunned. After reflecting on what he meant, Shen Li's cheeks flushed suddenly. Is he, to please her? I'm feeling great. She said, Actually, I'm very happy. She lowered her eyelids in silence, looked at the ground, softened her steadfast and hard gaze, and the emotions in her heart were like wave after wave. Shen Li also knew that perhaps only by putting on this disguise, he could be kind to her like this. He wanted to spoil her, so why not let him be at ease for a while? At night, Shen Li could not sleep and her ears suddenly moved. Her hearing has become much sharper these few days, and her voice is even better than before. To be precise, she heard someone entering the yard. There were about 4 people, but as soon as she heard the vain footsteps, she knew that the visitor had not even practiced martial arts. Shen Li laid on the bed and continued to sleep. They walked into the yard and stopped. But how could Xingji be unprepared? Sure enough, the four of them hadn't even reached the main hall, and suddenly heard two muffled hum sounds, as if two of them had fallen, and the other two panicked. In the chaos, they separated and ran around. One person rushed into the room where Shen Li was sleeping and the other rushed towards her. The door was opened, but Shen Li didn't even open her eyes. She only smelled the smell on the person's body and guessed that this person was the bullying Wang Bao they met during the day. He was panting hard as if he was frightened, but after a while, he seemed to see Shen Li on the bed and approached slowly. When he walked to the bed, Shen Li heard a gudong sound of him swallowing his saliva. Shen Li felt sick in her heart. She opened her eyes that were cold as ice, and with the moonlight coming through the window, Wang Bao could see there was murderous intent in them. Wang Bao was so horrified by her eyes that he backed away, and when he reacted, he immediately said, "Don't yell, girl, you don't need to call him." Seeing that Shen Li didn't say anything, he felt a little relieved and said, "You are sleeping in separate rooms." "Why?" He seemed to have an enlightenment. I am the eldest son of the village. I don't know how many times better than your husband who can only fish. Why not follow me today as my lover? How can you compare yourself with him?" Shen Li opened her mouth and sat up. With a soft voice she said, "The difference between you two is like the difference between clouds and mud." Wang Bao was taken aback. He looked at Shen Li blankly and listened to her cold voice. "This king has lived for 1,000 years, but this is the first time I was molested by someone like this. This experience is really rare, but it's a pity that you were too stubborn. I have no more mercy to grant." 1,000 years? Wang Bao was dumbfounded. Shen Li was too lazy to speak any more, so she stood up and waved her hand like a slap. She hasn't fully recovered from her injury now, and this palm has spared her strength, but for Wang Bao, this was already too much. After receiving the punch of Xingji, his face was still swollen, and Shen Li's palm hit him symmetrically. Wang Bao wailed and backed away. But how could Shen Li let her go so easily? She stretched out her hand to drag him, but she inadvertently grabbed his trouser belt. Wang Bao was pulled and turned twice. The trouser belt stayed to Shen Li's hand and his pants fell down. Shen Li didn't want to do this, but she heard Wang Bao's voice. He exclaimed, "WH! Why are you doing this?" The corner of Shen Li's mouth twitched. Suddenly she felt dark in front of her eyes, and a cool palm covered her eyes. The man behind sighed, "Don't look at the dirty stuff." Shen Li relaxed her posture, letting her body lean in the arms of the person behind her. When he put down his hand, the door of the room opened wide, and Wang Bao was panicked, running away. Shen Li turned around and glanced at Xingji. "I can cope with this situation without others' intervention." Xingji just smiled, "I know, but you can choose to be temporarily unable to cope." "Why?" "Because I will help you." Shen Li lowered her head and said nothing. In fact, her body has already chosen that way. On the second day, Xingji got up early and went out fishing as usual. Shen Li slept in the bed until she woke up naturally, but the moment she opened her eyes, she noticed something was wrong. She couldn't see anything, no sound, and no touch. She had no sense of smell either. She wanted to open her mouth to speak, but her throat was tightly closed. She knew that she was definitely speechless now. She couldn't verify whether she still exists now. She seemed to have fallen into a void, and there was nothing in it. Maybe she died. She couldn't tell. Shen Li controlled her emotions and allowed herself to sink and float in the darkness. She didn't panic, just thinking that it should be fine after this day, but how long this day is, and what time it is now, she didn't know. If Xingji saw her that way, she didn't know what would happen. She seemed to be the only one in the world, wandering in the void, as if she could never go out. She began to feel fear. What if she couldn't get better? What if she is like this from now on? She still has many things to do, many things to say, and so many unwillingnesses. How can she spend the rest of her life here? Shen Li wanted to escape from this place. She allowed herself to run non-stop, but in the endless darkness, she didn't know if she was running or not. She couldn't see the direction, the road, or even herself. Life and death were the same. Time seemed to pass extremely fast and extremely slow. She didn't know how long she had been in the dark, and suddenly she could hear some sounds in her ears. Someone was calling her. Shen Li, don't be afraid, I'm here. Don't be afraid. The person suppressed his emotions so hard, but Shen Li heard the distress in his words, so much distress as if to drown her. She smelled the outside smell, the smell of the sea on his body, and a very faint scent. It was a unique scent that belonged to Xingji. A smell of gods, so it made people feel at ease. Her limbs gradually recovered the feeling. She knew she was being held in his embrace. He was holding her so tightly, it seems like he wanted to protect her, and at the same time, rely on her. She raised her arms vigorously, hugged him back, and stroked his back. Have you been here all the time? She heard her voice extremely hoarse and was so tired that she couldn't say the next word. He hugged her even tighter, making Shen Li feel that the bones were strangled in pain, but it was this kind of pain that made her feel strangely warm and comfortable. I have been here all the time. He swore in her ear. I will always be here. Shen Li smiled, then next time I won't be so scared. Xingji's throat choked, and he couldn't say anything else. Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 60. From then on, before Xingji went out, he had to wake up Shen Li once to confirm whether she could perceive external things. In the first 2 days, Shen Li was still relatively cooperative. Within a few days, Shen Li became impatient. When he stopped to wake her, she only covered her head with the quilt. I can see and hear, but the sense of touch is gone, no problem. You can go, you can go. Xingji's outstretched hand stopped in the air. Hearing Shen Li's breathing, he looked at her dumbfoundingly, and seeing how she was behaving now, who would have thought that she was so scared that day? Her face was pale, her body trembling, and her hands and feet were cold. Maybe it was only in her unconsciousness that she would express that emotion. If this woman, Shen Li, was even half-conscious, she would never allow herself to be so fragile. I don't have any food at home, so I didn't make breakfast. I'm going to the market to buy some ingredients, and I will be back soon. If you feel hungry, get water and cheat your stomach. The person in the quilt responded dully. Xingji shook his head and went out. However, Shen Li woke up not long after Xingji left. Lying on the bed in a daze, she felt that the feelings devoted to Xingji were too much now, so much that it was almost beyond her control. Before she thought that after this period of time is over, she could just suppress all over again, but, what if, she couldn't suppress it anymore? Shen Li had never relied so much on people. She felt a sense of danger of burning her body. She sighed and couldn't sleep anymore. She lifted the quilt and got out of bed to wash, but she just walked to the yard and wanted to fetch water when she heard a few soft movements. Shen Li's eyes condensed, knowing that today's people are by no means as useless as those few rascals of a few days ago. She lowered her eyebrows and turned her head slightly. Who is there? A few sounds of thumbs settled, and 5 people in black stood separately in the yard. The king didn't make it easy for us to find you. Shen Li turned around with cold eyes, staring at the person who was talking. The person immediately winked at the person next to him, and several people surrounded Shen Li. Everyone has heard of the deeds of burning Fuxing and destroying dozens of creatures and their companions. They have all seen her tragic situation in the dungeon. She was wounded like that. Now she stands in perfect condition. In front of her, it was inevitable to be scared, and for a while, no one dared to step forward. The headed person gritted his teeth and said, "What are you afraid of?" Master Fuxing said that she must not have regained her mana, now she is a useless person. At this time, if the master hears that we found her but didn't catch her, you all will have to suffer the punishment. The last sentence seemed to awake them. After hearing the fear in everyone's hearts, a few people gave each other a glance and just wanted to do something, but they heard Shen Li sneer, "I already defeated your master before. Don't move indiscriminately." The few people were already scared, so as soon as she said this, they were even more panicked, and the leader shouted, "She must be bluffing people, do it." She was already without mana, and these people were cruel in their hearts, raising their hands and chanting. A white air overflowed from their fingertips, slowly condensing in front of them. After their formula stopped, they saw that the white gas actually condensed into an arrow. Shen Li knew that she was standing still, but between the electric light and flint, a barrier suddenly opened in front of her, and the white robe was blown in front of Shen Li's eyes by the wind generated by the impact. After the dust settled, Xingji steadily stood in front of Shen Li, his expression cold. Several people on the opposite side were stunned. Impossible. He actually blocked the water stop technique with his hand. Water stop technique? Xingji smiled. You said this technique? Xingji lifted his sleeves, an extremely cold breath swept out, but it was impossible to see the shape. When the reaction came, the man in black had been frozen into an ice sculpture. The younger generation tried to learn the art of the gods. Xingji's voice was as indifferent as usual, but it was shuddering in their ears. Go back and tell Fuxing, the gods will stop by, and come to visit in the future. Yes, Xingji Shenjun, one person was frightened, his legs weakened, and he staggered back and fell straight to the ground. The other three were frightened and ran away hurriedly. The man who fell down got up and ran outside, but he stopped when he heard Xingji say, "Stop." The man's legs trembled, and the bottom of his pants soon became wet. He was scared he peed his pants. Move this thing away. He pointed at the ice sculpture, and the man in black nodded hurriedly, carried the ice sculpture desperately, and moved away in a panic. Shen Li looked stunned behind him. I have been fighting on the battlefield for many years, but I never knew that a name could scare the opponent like this. Your title is really prestigious. What about the prestige? I didn't have time when it was supposed to work, causing you to be hurt, Xingji said, indifferent and slightly bitter. He swallowed the second half before he finished. Shen Li was joking first. She did not think he would take this so seriously, so she was slightly taken aback. She vaguely felt that since she was injured, his behavior seems to be a little different from before. If this was before, he wouldn't say things like this no matter what. Shen Li was silent, and there was silence in the yard for a while, before he asked, "My identity, you already knew it before?" Shen Li was slightly startled, and said, "Didn't you already knew that I was aware?" Xingji remained silent. There are some things that both parties know, but it's quite different when they are stated clearly. Xingji could no longer play the ordinary fisherman now, and Shen Li is no longer the Shen Li who lodges at the fisherman's house. One of them is the god of Xingji from the outer sky, the other is the Azure King of the demon realm. Shen Li shoulders the responsibility as the guardian of the demon realm. And his responsibility is the safety of the three realms. Now that Fuxing has come and sent soldiers, they should wake up from that dream, was time to face other things. My body is almost healed, but the mana has not been restored, and staying in the human world is not an option. I'll have to trouble the god to send me back to the demon world. He refused without even looking at her. No. Shen Li was stunned by such a straightforward answer. Why? She said with caution, as if he was playing tricks. I don't want to send you. If you are capable, go back by yourself. Shen Li was slightly angry. How can you let me go back with my own? Now she can't even probe where the entrance to the demon realm is, let alone fly through the clouds and mist, shuttle between the two realms. You are doing this to embarrass me. Xingji smiled and said, so, you know. Shen Li was silent for a moment, then she took a deep breath and said, I want to return to the demon realm. First, the situation is chaotic now, not to mention the external and internal troubles of the demon realm. The atmosphere of the heaven realm is very strange recently. Although with the condition of my body, I can't do anything real when I go back, the marriage contract with Fu Rong is still there. At this time, the wedding will definitely alleviate the disparity between the two worlds. It is a good thing to be united now. Second, the demon world may have a way to get my mana back and restore my 5 senses. It's better than doing nothing. First, cancelled. Xingji poured a cup of tea on the table and said softly, Azure King and Fu Rong's marriage contract has been cancelled. Shen Li was stunned. Wait. Why? When she desperately tried to escape the marriage, they were tied together, but when Shen Li finally saw benefits in it, this person actually told her that her wedding with Fu Rong was cancelled? On the entire 3 realms is well-known Azure King was killed. Xingji said faintly, how can heaven's grandson marry a dead person? Therefore, your marriage is cancelled. Both Heavenly Emperor and Demon Lord recognize this. Shen Li froze for a moment. For some reason, her first thought was, Jun Fu Rong must have been very happy to hear this. Xingji took a sip of tea and shook his head. No, he was heartbroken when he heard that Mo Fong was dead. It seemed that after going on a hunger strike for 2 or 3 days, he heard that Mo Fong was a traitor and spy, and he was even more traumatized, so he almost cried. Hearing Mo Fong's name, Shen Li's eyebrows also sank, but she did not give him too much detail. When he thought about it, he stopped and said, Second, I have the method to restore mana and 5 senses. And this method is in the human world. I was planning to let you heal completely before telling you, but since you are so impatient, I can tell you now. Shen Li was overjoyed. Really? Although she hasn't complained about the current situation where all her magic power is lost, in her heart she hopes that they can recover as soon as possible. After all, Azure King is proud, and without power, Shen Li would not ever be the same. From here to the north, crossing the North Sea, and bypassing an ice-snow plain, you will see a snowy mountain. There is a big demon living in it. There are many rare things for people to buy and sell, and there may be more things than in the heavens. So there may be a way or medicine to restore you. Shen Li's eyes lit up. So, maybe I can find a new weapon. Xingji was startled and suddenly coughed twice, as if I thought of something slightly embarrassing. You don't need to find a new one. Your broken spear, I have already picked it up for you. But I put it in the sky, but I can go and bring it to you. Has her broken spear been connected? This didn't seem strange at first, but when you think about it. She is the lord of the demon world. It stands to reason that her things after her death should be left to the demon world for safekeeping. Why did he get the 2 pieces of the spear? And also reconnect it and place it in the outer sky? Her gun has been influenced by demonic energy all the year round and has killed countless people. The evil spirit is compelling. It should be in conflict with the spirit of Xingji. Wouldn't it be a big damage to his body if he took the gun? Putting this aside, he said that he took the gun and put it in the sky. How could the demons allow it? Outsiders don't know, but Shen Li knows it in her heart. For the demons, she is the Azure King, the demon lord's disciple, and like a daughter. A child's relic can't be easily given. Shen Li frowned and looked suspiciously. Xingji turned his head and said, I will take you north in 2 days. He got up and left. Hey, wait a minute. Shen Li called to him, do you have any injuries on your body? Xingji turned around and smiled, what kind of injury can I have? Yes, he was such a powerful god, how could he get hurt? In the dark room, one person stood quietly, his broad robe almost covered his face, the high god, he whispered softly. The plan is not yet completed, he appeared too early. He turned his head. Looking at the black-cloaked youth on the side with cold eyes, young master, is this the result you wanted? Mo Feng only said coldly, everything else will do, but leave Shen Li alone. Fu Xing laughed mockingly, young master's kindness is overwhelming. Where was this kindness when you escaped from the demon's capital? I clearly remember that there was a general who wanted to save you out of the creature's hands. It was you who killed him in secret with a sword. Heh. Why didn't you have such kindness at that time? Mo Feng quietly closed his eyes. Fu Xing continued, I can't do anything to Shen Li. But you know that Phoenix Orb is the most indispensable thing in the plan, but you still let her go. Young master, this childish love made you blind? The sacrifice of these centuries will be ruined on that Shen Li? If the Lord knew it, he would be extremely sad. I will find an alternative. Mo Feng said after a long silence, I want you to go north to the place where the golden snake demon is. I heard that there are many rare and exotic treasures in his place. Look for it. If you can find something to replace the Phoenix Fire Pearl, you can't move on Shen Li. Fu Xing sneered, if I can find it, I won't move Shen Li again. Mo Feng turned and left. Fu Xing sat quietly for a while, and someone suddenly reported, my lord, among the 100 human beings captured, after being fed the pill, 95 of them died and 3 became complete demons. 2 of them fell into a coma. Defective product, kill them. Fu Xing waved his hand and sent the person away. He thought for a while and then said, take the few people who escaped from Xingji's hands and give them pills. They have learned spells, and if they succeed, they should be even more powerful. Yes, sir, there is one more thing, the 3rd prince of Beihai seems to have no more secrets to confide. Fu Xing nodded, so, take out the core and put it together with the other 2 for safekeeping.